Chapter 22-23. Academy Master Lu passed through dozens of worlds in a row and was relieved to see that no one was following him. The reason why he left in a hurry earlier was because he saw a brand new path of cultivation in front of him and had no intention of getting the Jade Stone. Another reason was that he was afraid that Meng Hu would come to settle scores with him again. Normally, people would let him go if they said they would let him go. However, after interacting with Meng Hu, he realized that it was hard to fathom his thoughts. What if he suddenly came to find him and said, "I changed my mind"? Then who could he reason with? A few days later, he came to the front of another realm gate. From here, he could directly go to Bushu Heaven from this place of creation. However, even a true Yang mighty figure did not know the difference between the present world. Therefore, in the eyes of people like Academy Master Lu, it was just passing through to another world. If one wanted to pass through this realm gate, if one did not have any contact with Yen sect, one would need to inform in advance before using it. In the end, one might not really be able to pass through. Fortunately, he was an elder of Huanjin Temple. Not only did the sect have frequent contact with Yen sect, he also had a good relationship with some of the guardians of Yen sect. Therefore, there was no need to wait. After the disciple guarding the altar checked his talisman, he let him pass. Before passing through the realm gate, he raised his head and took a glance at the grand light screen. He could not help but feel a little emotional. Everywhere Yen sect went, there would be a realm gate built. It expanded so quickly because of this item. Many cultivators went to remote places and now directly borrowed the realm gate of Yen sect. Because of this, there were not many sects that could do without Yen sect. Not only that, the existence of this item was also equivalent to Yen sect announcing to the outside world that there was a mighty figure behind it. This was not something that could be done by an upper mortal metamorphosis. At the very least, one needed to reach the level of Yuan Zun. Therefore, the sects generally believed that the person who established Yen sect should be one of the four creators, Yuan Zun. However, they were not sure which one it was. In his heart, he felt that it was hard to say whether the realm gate was good or bad. In the past, because the small sects were restricted to one place, they could only rely on the whims of the large sects to survive. Now, with these realm gates, they could go anywhere they wanted, and it was not difficult for them to even move their sections. The deterrents and restraints that the large sects had on them were greatly reduced, and this actually harmed the interests of many sections. Currently, there were no conflicts between the various sects and the Yanjiao, so it seemed to be harmonious on the surface. However, once a conflict broke out, it was hard to say whether or not they would be attacked by the masses. Although this had nothing to do with him at the moment, it might not be the case in the future. After passing through the realm gate, he returned to the mountain and sea realm and didn't stay for long. Instead, he returned to the sect to report on his duties. At the same time, he sent a memorial to the sect, saying that he wanted to go out and visit the Tao. This was essentially handing over all of his authority to someone else. Originally, with his current status and achievements, if he continued to accumulate, it was possible for him to become a sect elder in the future and participate in the decision-making of the sect's affairs. But now, it was equivalent to announcing his withdrawal. Many of his fellow disciples who were on good terms with him urged him to reconsider, but he had already made up his mind. Moreover, he didn't care about all of this. If it weren't for the fact that he still needed the identity of an elder of the Aneda Temple, he would have already withdrawn from the sect. In fact, if his cultivation increased in the future, then he would really do so. It was common for disciples of large sects to go out and establish their own sects. And not only would they not shed all pretense of cordiality with their original sect, they would usually form a close relationship like the upper and lower sections. The sect elders thought that he was preparing to cultivate with all his might, so they quickly agreed to his request. Now that Academy head Lu had received permission, he felt relieved. He could start his plan now. What he was thinking now was the same as the two elders of the Luo sect, Gu and Shi, which was to find a way to spread the Tao techniques of the spirit of creation. Because on the path of cultivation, if you weren't a genius, you wouldn't be able to go far alone. If there were more people of the same path supporting each other, not only would they be able to unleash more power, they could also learn from each other when they were comprehending the Tao techniques, learning from each other's strengths to make up for their weaknesses. However, although the cultivation of gu and shi wasn't bad, they were born in a desolate region. Before they entered Tao, they didn't even know a few words. However, the Luo sect only needed to worship the portrait of the demon god to obtain mana. Moreover, the two's qualifications weren't bad, so their path of improvement was fast. However, they really didn't have much of a plan. All they could think of was to find a secret place, accept disciples, and then preach. If they were lucky, they could finally stand side by side with the Luo sect and the Yen sect. The general direction was right, but there were no advantages in the details. It was purely to take one step at a time. Not to mention other things, once the Luo sect was free and tried to catch the two, then the results that they had worked hard for hundreds of years would instantly collapse. On the other hand, Dean Lu was different. Although he wasn't a reincarnated person from the 9 continents, he had entered the Ineta temple since he was young. He had followed his masters to visit many major sects, and he had also served as a branch dean for hundreds of years. His background, and even his experience were not comparable to the two. He believed that it was good to teach disciples, but it would take too long to establish a sect from nothing. Moreover, because they would be separated from the various sects, it would be easy for them to be labeled as unorthodox, and they would naturally be restricted by an invisible boundary. Of course, he could also choose to go to a desolate region to start a new situation. In terms of strength, he was strong enough. However, if he was stained with the brand of the outer Tao, it would be difficult to return to his original state, unless he could develop to a power like the Yen sect. However, he didn't have the support of Yuan Zun, so he didn't dare to think about it. However, he didn't completely give up on this path. He still needed to accept disciples, at least he couldn't rely on himself for preaching the Tao. Therefore, he first went to a few desolate worlds, where he carefully selected a few disciples and taught them Taoist magics. After about 30 years, he had trained a group of disciples, and then returned to the mountain and sea realm. Nowadays, cultivators from all over the heavens would often visit the mountain and sea realm, and there were many places where they could discuss the Tao. It didn't matter what sect you came from, or where you came from. That was one of the advantages of being an elder of the Ineta temple. If he gave a lecture to someone from a small sect, it wouldn't attract many people, and most of the people who came were rogue cultivators. But if he gave a lecture, Taoist cultivators from the large sects would come to listen, which would attract even more people. The Taoist magics he spoke of were the Daos of the good fortune spirit. Because it focused on unearthing the potential of the good fortune spirit, it was more of a new magic. Soon, the cultivators from the large sects lost interest, and the lively atmosphere gradually died down. However, he didn't seem to care. Every 10 days, he would give a lecture. This went on for more than 10 years. One day, he finished his lecture, and was just about to leave when a middle-aged Taoist walked up to him, clasped his hands, and said, "Elder Lu, I am Chu Shang from the Yunshu realm. Greetings." Court Chief Lu returned the greeting, then smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Chu, is there something you need?" Chu Shang said, "There are a few questions regarding the Taoist magics that I would like to ask you. Would it be possible for us to find another place to talk?" Court Chief Lu happily agreed. Behind the lecture area was a pavilion with flowering trees, a lake, and a waterside pavilion. The two of them found a secluded place to sit down. Chu Shang asked a few questions, which he answered one by one. Chu Shang sighed and said, "I used to cultivate Taoism, but I always felt that I had not used enough of myself. Later on, I realized that the Taoist magics that I cultivated were not suitable for me. Thus, I traveled all over the heavens, but regrettably, I still couldn't find the true Tao. However, after listening to fellow Taoists lecture, I felt enlightened and realized what I lacked." At this point, he also stated his purpose. "It seems that in my realm, the old laws are all in the hands of the large sections. The new laws are flawed and not enough to protect Taoism. However, after listening to fellow Taoists lecture for so many days, I see that fellow Taoists' method seems to have a ladder to heaven that can help the people of the world. I wonder if fellow Taoists can come to my realm to preach about Taoism?" Court Chief Lu didn't seem to have any change on the surface, but he was secretly excited and thought, "It's finally here." These days, there were many people who invited him to preach about Taoism, but he rejected all of them. Those people were not sincere, some were only interested in his identity and strength, and some just wanted to build a relationship with the Huanzhen temple behind him. Actually, he had long since noticed this person. Every time he preached about Taoism, this person would come early and leave late. He was sincerely inviting him to preach about Taoism. The most amazing thing was that this person came from the lower realm of the mountain and sea realm, Yunshu realm. This realm itself had dozens of lower realms, and it was closely connected to the mountain and sea realm. It also had an extremely wide space to move about, making it the most suitable place for him to establish his foundation. He sighed and said, "These days, I have also noticed that only fellow Taoist just now is a person of my Tao. Today, since fellow Taoist has sincerely invited me, I am willing to go with you." When Chu Shang heard this, he was overjoyed and said, "When is it convenient for fellow Taoist?" Court Chief Lu smiled and said, "Since I have found a fellow Taoist, there is no need for me to preach about Taoism here. I can go with fellow Taoist now." On the other side, after a long period of preparation, Yanjiao finally opened a sect on the Kunshe continent. And in order to establish a foothold here, Gao Chengtu transferred elite disciples from the various altars here, hoping that they would be able to create a good situation. Meng, who was a person who had repeatedly made contributions, and his own cultivation was far superior to his peers, so this time he was also among them. However, compared to other people of the same generation, he arrived a little later. This was because his identity was somewhat special, and Zhang Chan did not want him to be too close to ordinary people. It would not be good if he was unconsciously influenced by others. Along with him, there was also a small child, Zhuo Qingqing's son, Zhuo Yu, but he had now changed his name to Zhuo Yu. Not only was he different from ordinary people, but he was also different from the other spirits of good fortune. After dozens of years, he looked no more than 8 or 9 years old, and even his mind was the same. Because it would be inappropriate to leave the spirits of good fortune alone, he had brought him along this time. This must be Protector Meng from the altars. A deacon who was in charge of receiving and sending people here and there smiled and greeted him. Protector Meng's residence has already been arranged. Protector Meng, please follow me. Meng, who looked left and right and said curiously, "Why is this place so empty? Didn't many fellow Taoists come first? Where did they go?" That deacon said, "To be honest with Protector Meng, for the sake of the future, our sect's altars have set up a foothold far away from other sections. There are many demons and monsters here, and the other protectors have all gone out to exterminate the beasts. Alas, to be honest with Protector Meng, these few days, a few protectors have already unfortunately lost their lives." Meng, who said with a shocked expression, "This place is so dangerous? Why didn't anyone tell me? Could it be that someone wants to harm me?" Chapter 22-24. Somewhere in the nameless world, Yuan Zhenqing sat cross-legged on the boundless land. In front of him was a ball of treasure light that was about 3 feet tall. Vaguely, one could see the souls of countless demons and monsters wailing inside. After killing tens of thousands of demons, he had used the treasures he had collected earlier to refine a treasure embryo. However, he was still one step away from completing it. Because the bodies and souls of these demons were great nourishment for many different kinds of creatures, before the treasure was completed, it would definitely attract many demon essences and even void creatures. These foreign species would not fight one-on-one. Instead, they would flock to you so there would be a greater risk. However, this was his intention. Otherwise, he would not have chosen this place. In order to ensure that this person would come, he did not even set up a formation. This was because only by using this person's blood as a sacrifice could the treasure be refined successfully. After a long time, divine light began to gather in his eyes. He had finished adjusting his qi. Then he pointed with his finger and began the final refinement. The spiritual light on the treasure fetus was originally gentle and calm, but after 100 breaths, it suddenly released boundless spiritual light that shot through the sky and into the void. It was mixed with the mournful cries of the souls of tens of thousands of demons and beasts. The appearance of many demons and devils when they were alive also appeared one after another, rushing and colliding in the sky above the entire continent. Such a big movement first caused a commotion among the demons and monsters nearby. However, before these foreign species could get close, they were easily destroyed by the chi released by Yuan Zhangqing. They could not get close at all. However, as the refining process progressed, more and more demons and monsters were attracted from far away. Not long after, there were void creatures that sensed it. They broke through the void and came to this world. However, when these variant beasts charged forward, their paths were obstructed by the dense expanse of heavenly shuttles without exception, and it was like an enormous net that covered the sky and obstructed their path, causing them to be unable to charge forward. Moreover, every time a variant beast was killed, its blood essence and soul would surely be drawn over by a strand of energy before being poured onto the treasured embryo. Yuan Jingqing's face was calm. The pressure from these demons was not as much as he had thought. Although there were many of them, they were still like a plate of loose sand. It was already good that they did not fight each other. It was impossible for them to attack together. This caused them to not come to fight, but to rush to their deaths. Half a year after the demons had attacked, their numbers became sparse. This was because as the treasured embryos gradually formed, the spiritual light on them also began to converge. When the time came for them to condense, it would be useless even if they were snatched away. Thus, the attraction to the beasts became smaller and smaller. At this time, Yuan Zhangqing took out a talisman from his sleeve. This was a strand of clear qi that he had specially begged his master to bestow upon him. He wanted to use this talisman for the final refining of the treasure. Now that the time was right, he could use it. He silently prayed in his heart and tossed the talisman up. In an instant, a ray of clear light fell on the treasure embryo like rain. The treasure suddenly shook violently, causing the entire world to shake. After a long time, it had calmed down. Yuan Zhangqing glanced at the void. He did not know when, but the demons and monsters outside had disappeared without a trace. He then looked down and saw that the spiritual light on the treasure embryo had already dissipated. What appeared in front of him was a treasure that had the appearance of a round sky. There were thin lines of golden light rising up from the sides and converging at the top of the dome. At the top of the dome, there were layers of white light that spread down. It looked like a warp and weft, forming a cage-like object. Once this treasure was formed, as long as one's qi fell into this treasure, regardless of whether one was a Xiantian demon or a monster, as long as one's qi fell into this treasure, the controller only needed to gently push it and it would be erased from the world. Yuan Zhangqing thought in his heart and said, "Restore the world to clarity, build a heavenly net, slaughter all demons to wash away the filth." This treasure is called the demon-suppressing heavenly net. As soon as he finished speaking, he shook his sleeve and the heavenly net turned into a ray of spiritual light that flew in. Then, he tapped his foot and turned into a ray of clear light that pierced through the void and disappeared without a trace. Zhang Yan stood in the Qinghuan Palace and looked at the place where the void was broken. Recently, he could already feel that as the Weili permeated more and more, in addition to Xiang Ju and the others trying to receive them, another great virtue was about to return. The ones who returned last time were Ji Zhuang and Ji Lian. It was just that Ji Zhuang had more than half of his power, while Ji Lian had only condensed a Weili incarnation. In reality, only Ji Zhuang had truly fallen into the realm of all. However, it was different this time. As the great virtue gradually returned, the obstruction of the tribulation power was also much weaker than before. Perhaps there would be a scene where two great virtues returned together. If this person returned, it was very likely that he would be incited by Xiang Ju and the others to come and fight with him for the land of fortune. However, he was already prepared. Only by fighting could he see the great Tao. If this person came, he would be happy to accompany him. After an unknown period of time, the Weili that was obstructed by the tribulation power finally broke through its restraints and poured into the realm of all. At the same time, the realm of all started to shake as if it would collapse at any time. Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. He had seen this scene many times. If there was no one to receive the tribulation power caused by the great virtue's return, he would have to use the fortune Pauline to receive it. Wei Ming, and Xiangju's fortune Pauline were all in his hands. Although they had borrowed the fortune Pauline later, their power was not enough to bear it, so he had to do it himself. Thus, with a shake of his sleeve, 2 Pauline flowers appeared. As soon as the tribulation power fell, they would receive it on their own. Zhi Lian sat in the realm of tranquility. After making an agreement with the purple-clothed Taoist, he had always remembered what the purple-clothed Taoist said. He had been waiting to see if he could receive his own power this time. Because he was only a Weili incarnation, the power he could summon was not much, and the influence he could cause was limited. Thus, Wei Ming and Xiangju did not rope him in to work with them. They still let him draw the Weili on his own. Just as he was sitting in the realm of tranquility, his body suddenly trembled. The Weili that usually fell like a drop of dew suddenly poured over like a vast ocean. At the same time, many memories returned together. As if a long time had passed, his eyes opened slightly, and there was a divine light bursting out. Behind him, layers of Tao techniques appeared and evolved. He waved his hand, and in an instant, his fortune Pauline was summoned back, and his own Weili was placed inside. At this moment, he sensed slightly, and found that there was another person who was about to return. After calculating, he sneered, "So it's this person." Wei Ming and Xiangju have no other way to go, and they actually called this person over. Let's see how they will deal with this when the time comes. Just as he returned, the world of nothingness seemed to flicker, and a Taoist walked out from the nothingness. He glanced at the world of nothingness and laughed, always urging the will of heaven. The heart is like a spirit platform falling into Hongdu. He stopped laughing, and glanced at the gap in the nothingness again and sneered, "This is the power of calamity, it can't stop me." In the nothingness, there was a flash of light, and Wei Ming and Xiangju appeared in front of him. They came up and bowed and said, "Taoist Fengdu is too polite." Hongdu casually returned the bow, and said with some displeasure, "I see that there are a few other Taoist friends in the world of nothingness, but why only 2 of you came to greet me?" Xiangju said, "Taoist Fengdu, some Taoist friends haven't returned, and their memories are missing, so they probably don't know you. Some Taoist friends are created after the essence of creation was broken, so they don't know you either." Hongdu nodded, "That makes sense. Now that I have returned, I will naturally do something big. Both of you, please follow me." He arranged the 2 with just a sentence, as if everything was natural. Although Xiangju and Wei Ming already knew this person's temper, they still sneered in their hearts, but they didn't say anything on the surface. They only needed this person to fight against Zhang Yan, so it was not a big deal for them to be patient for now. According to their estimation, after Bu Su Tian and the Weili of the land of creation, these 2 should be evenly matched, but with the help of a few others, they would be able to suppress Zhang Yan. Xiangju then said, "Fellow Taoist, you should have a place to stay when you return." After the collapse of the creation spirit, it was divided into many places of creation. Among them, the place where the essence of creation is the most concentrated is called Bu Su Heaven. It is now occupied by a Taoist Xinyuan. We all regard this place as a realm, and only people like you can control it. If it had been someone else, he would never have said so. It was obvious that he was trying to sow discord between them and Zhang Yan. No one would be fooled. However, it was different for Hongdu. He acted according to his heart. As for the reason and whether or not he would be used by others, it was never within the scope of his consideration. Hongdu glanced at Bu Su Tian, but didn't say anything. Instead, he asked, "Are there any places of creation under your rule?" Xiangju tried to ask, "Are you not going to find Bu Su Tian?" Hongdu glanced at him and said, "Are you teaching me how to do things? I can do this whenever I want. Why do I need you to remind me?" Although he acted according to his own intuition, he instinctively felt that this was not a good time to take over this place. He would never force himself, so he didn't act immediately. Wei Ming pondered for a while, then came up and said, "Fellow Taoist, I have 3 places under my control, and I am willing to offer them to you." Satisfied, Hongdu said, "Good, let me take care of all the places of creation in your hands. If I find such places in the future, I will not mistreat you." Wei Ming nodded. This was within his expectations. Although it would be disadvantageous for him to do this, he had observed the 3 places, and the only thing he would lose was the Whaley who could not use the 3 places of creation. But even if there were such Whaley, he was still no match for Zhang Yan, so there was no harm in giving them away. Moreover, although Hongdu did things as he pleased, if he obtained a place of creation as long as one asked for it, and if he was in a good mood, he would really share it with others. Even if he knew there were creation spirits outside, he wouldn't care. This was one of the reasons why Hongdu was willing to bring him back. As for Bu Su Tian, even if he didn't go now, he would find him sooner or later. Now was not the time to be anxious, all they had to do was wait patiently. Chapter 22-25. Wei Ming opened the doors to the 3 places of creation, allowing Hongdu's Whaley to settle down. Hongdu observed for a while and snorted, seemingly unsatisfied. He said, "These few places can barely survive." Xiangju sighed. "That's why I said that only Bu Shutian's place is suitable for you." Fengdu said, "That place will be mine sooner or later." Xiangju looked at him and saw that he really had no intention of taking Bu Shutian, so he said no more. Hongdu waved his sleeve at the 2 and said, "I need to go into seclusion to study the Tao. If you don't want me to summon you, don't come and bother me." With that, he turned and disappeared. Wei Ming and Xiangju were expressionless. Usually, even if they were enemies, they would be respectful to each other and would not embarrass each other. But Hongdu was like this, and he had never restrained himself. Therefore, some of his peers guessed that this was caused by the Tao technique he carried behind him. In the transformation of Tao arts, there was change within the constant, and there was chaos within the change. Perhaps what he grasped was a part of the chaos, and this was also the reason why his strength was more formidable than those of the same generation. If that was really the case, it was already very fortunate that this person hadn't reached the level of acting recklessly and had only spoken disrespectfully to others. Wei Ming sighed. "You are still too impatient. Just now fellow Taoist Fengdu has returned, and the Whaley in his hand has not been removed yet. How can he fight with Taoist Shenyuan now? Let's wait and see." Just now, although Hongdu had not revealed his creation Pauline, he had returned safely without being harmed. This meant that the item had been found, and the Whaley had also fallen here. It was just that they had not seen Pauline yet. Xiangju smiled and said, "Since fellow Fengdu didn't go there immediately, it means that he knows that it's difficult to subdue Taoist Shenyuan on his own. He looked at the place of creation. Since he wants to meditate here, we'll go back first. When he thinks of this, he'll naturally come to us." He thought for a moment, then said, "I just saw that Taoist Shenyuan used our treasured lotuses to bear the tribulation power. If he doesn't resolve it, I'm afraid we won't have a way to deal with it." Xiangju said, "Fellow Taoist Shenyuan wants to call Pauline back first and remove it?" He thought for a moment and said, "If we do this, losing face is secondary. I'm afraid there will be more trouble. Why don't we maintain the current situation first?" Wei Ming immediately understood what he meant. He was afraid that Taoist Shenyuan would use this as an excuse to find them. He thought for a while and nodded. "Fellow Taoist Shenyuan," and said, Taoist Shenyuan. "Fellow Taoist Shenyuan." After the 2 came to an agreement, they went their separate ways and returned to their original places to wait. In the blink of an eye, 200 years had passed. After Xiangju returned, he focused on promoting the spread of his own Tao. However, the lotus of fate that he borrowed was called back by Zhi Lian. Only the one that Ji Zhuang obtained from the purple-robed Taoist could be used as usual. However, the purple-robed Taoist had become estranged from him due to the matter of Hongdu. Therefore, he could only borrow a few petals from him to maintain the great power that permeated the land of creation. However, in this way, the support he could provide to his own sect became very limited. Fortunately, he was lucky. Under Yen sect's intentional loosening of pressure, the Luo sect and Xing sect achieved considerable development. But that was all. It seemed impossible to break through the barrier built by Yen sect. But he was already satisfied with this. Although he did not know why Zhang Yan deliberately let him have his way, it was possible that if this continued, the Tao behind the spirit he was studying would not be cut off. Just when he was focused on this, he suddenly felt a wave of divine will. His heart moved. This was clearly Fengdu's divine will. Without any hesitation, he immediately turned into an unknown place and found that Taoist Wei Ming had also arrived. He first greeted him, then bowed to Hongdu and said with a smile, "Taoist friend, why have you invited the two of us here?" Hongdu said, "I came to find you today because I want to do something big. Call all the fellow Taoists in Suji and tell them that I have something to tell them." Xiangju's spirit rose and he thought, finally. He thought that it should be because of his words earlier. Plus, this person was very dissatisfied with the place of creation, so he had already decided to seek Bu Su Tian. He said, "Taoist friend, don't worry. Taoist Wei Ming and I will invite everyone here." Hongdu said, "Then go quickly. Don't make me wait too long." When he finished, his figure flashed and he had already left the divine will. Xiangju laughed and said, "Looks like this person is finally going to make a move." Wei Ming nodded slowly. Wasn't this the reason why they summoned this person to Zhuyu? Xiangju thought for a while and said, "I know that Taoist Lian's Weili has recovered. Last time, I forcefully borrowed Pauline from him. I will personally go to his place to resolve the misunderstanding." Wei Ming said, "Then let me go to Taoist Ji Zhuang's place. Now that things have come to this, he will not refuse." Xiangju said, "All right, you and I will go separately." After bidding farewell to him, he withdrew from his divine will. With a slight calculation, he found the location of Lian Ji's qi activity. With a thought, he came to the world-stabilizing realm. He cupped his hands and said, "Is fellow Taoist here?" Taoist Jilian walked out of the world of tranquility and said with an indifferent expression, "Taoist friend, what brings you here?" Xiangju thought for a while, but there was no impression of this person in his memory. This was a little strange, but it could also be due to the part of power that he was missing. He smiled and said, "Taoist friend, congratulations on your Weili return." But Jilian's expression was distant and he said indifferently, "It's just a Weili return. It's not like I have to see the great Tao. What's there to be happy about?" Xiangju bowed again and said, "Taoist Jilian, last time I borrowed Pauline from you, I had no choice. I hope you don't mind." Jilian said, "I won't mind. The person who borrowed Pauline from you was Jilian, not me." Xiangju smiled again and said, "Then I don't know, how should I address you now?" Jilian said indifferently, "All things belong to Zhu Heng. Yuan is not in the mind. Now that I have returned from Weili, I am no longer Jilian. You can call me Heng Wu." Xiangju said, "So it's Taoist Heng Wu." He paused for a moment and looked over. Other than Taoist Heng Wu, there is also Taoist Fengdu. Do you know him? Heng Wu said indifferently, "I know him, but I don't want to deal with him." Xiangju smiled and said, "Don't you want to find a place of creation? Currently, most of the blessed lands are occupied by Taoist Xianyuan, and Bu Shutian is also in his hands. Only by joining forces can we break this situation and share the blessed lands with us." Heng Wu said disapprovingly, "There are still many places of creation. Why fight with others? We can just find them ourselves." Xiangju laughed and shook his head. "Fellow Taoist, you should know that such a place is becoming more and more difficult to find. What's more, if Taoist Xianyuan uses the spirit of creation as an excuse to not allow you to control the land of creation and force you to give it up, what will you do then?" Heng Wu pondered for a while before saying, "It's hard to find, but it's not impossible. Fellow Taoist Wei Ming is still here, and the 3 places of creation under his rule have not been taken away. It's enough to show that Taoist Xianyuan is not unreasonable. If I can find it, I'll exchange it with him." Xiangju said, "That's what you think, but that Taoist Xianyuan might not agree to it. Fellow Taoist Fengdu is trying to take Bu Shutian away, and our strength is enough to suppress him. If you come, you might be able to get a share of the benefits here. If you don't, then fellow Taoist Fengdu is not someone who is easy to deal with. You should think carefully." Heng Wu pondered for a moment. Deep in his heart, he also thought that Zhang Yan had little chance of winning this time. If Zhang Yan was expelled, Hongdu might really come looking for trouble with him. He sighed and said, "Fine, I'll go with you." While Xiangju was trying to persuade Heng Wu, Ji Zhuang was also convinced by Wei Ming. It didn't take long before the four of them arrived at Fengdu's land of creation. After greeting Fengdu, they sat down in the guest seats. Ji Zhuang looked at Fengdu, who was sitting on the high platform, and sighed. He had always opposed the idea of bringing Fengdu to Tianyu, but since Fengdu had returned, Ji Zhuang wouldn't say anything. He alone couldn't oppose anything, and he couldn't stand on Zhang Yan's side either. Since he could only choose between the two, he had no choice but to come. Now, most of the great virtues were gathered here. With such a big lineup, if there were no accidents, they were going to attack Taoist Shen Yuan. Last time, the three of them were no match for Fengdu. Now, with two more people, the five of them working together could not only force Taoist Shen Yuan to give up the land of creation, but also take down Bushutian. Fengdu's gaze descended, and he gazed at everyone below the platform as he said, "Everyone, since the essence of creation was shattered, it was dispersed into countless places of creation. If we want to seek the Grand Tao, then we must observe these places. However, everyone wants these places, yet no one is able to obtain them. In the end, it's nothing more than a struggle between each other, and if this continues, then it seems like it will never end. I have been thinking about this when I was meditating. I want to think of a way to solve this once and for all, so that we won't be burdened by this." Xiangju smiled deeply. He thought that this person was really easy to incite. He would definitely lead them to kill Bushutian. Fengdu stood up from his seat and took a few steps forward. He clasped his hands behind his back and continued, "However, the root of everything here is actually the creation spirit. Because of its existence, we can't trust each other, and we are afraid that it will take away the fruit of the way." Hearing this, Xiangju's expression changed slightly. He felt that something was wrong and suddenly looked up. Fengdu continued, "Therefore, I have decided to first find a way to kill the creation spirit. Once this great enemy is eliminated, all the problems will be solved. From now on, we won't have to worry about finding the way anymore." As soon as he finished speaking, the surroundings instantly fell into deathly silence. Chapter 22-26. Xiangju, Wei Ming, and the others thought that Hong Do had called them over to fight for Bu Su Tian, but they did not expect him to say something so unexpected. Not only did this disappoint their hopes, but it also made them feel that it was absurd. Had he gone mad? Did he know what he was talking about? Indeed, if the creation spirit could be destroyed, then all problems could be solved. But how was that possible? Who could do it? Wei Ming asked, "What is fellow Taoist Fengdu thinking?" Xiangju said, "Don't worry. Even if he wants to target the creation spirit, where can he find one? He is just being carried away by a sudden impulse. Let us convince him to give up on this idea." He had calmed down by now. In his opinion, Hong Do always did things as he pleased. Before things really got out of hand, he could still try to make Hong Do change his mind, instead of doing something that had no possibility of success. Thus, he said, right now, the Vedanta and the creation spirit's chi are entangled, and it is difficult to tell who will win. Even if one Vedanta cannot fight against all of them, he is not far from it. How can fellow Taoist be so sure that you can solve this problem? Hongdu looked confident and said, "Since I have brought this up, I naturally have a way to solve it." Wei Ming frowned and said, "Could it be that fellow Taoist wants to start by borrowing the body? Forgive me for being blunt, but this is not a good idea." If Hongdu did not care about anything else and tried to find out who the spirit of creation was, they would be harmed instead. This was because the spirit of creation would not be able to tell them apart. Even if Hongdu's cultivation was above theirs, he would not be able to tell them apart. Moreover, the body that was being borrowed might not even know its true identity. Hongdu said disdainfully, "Since I said that I want to solve this problem from the root, why would I bother with these minor details?" He looked at the others and said, "When we, the Weili, returned, we were not complete because we were hindered by the tribulation, and the creation spirit was the same." When everyone heard this, they could vaguely sense his thoughts. Hongdo continued, "As long as we find a way to lure a part of the spirit of creation back to the Weili, we can use the Tao of being and non-being to seize its Tao art and wear down its body. Then, its power will be greatly weakened. After that, whether we lure it back to the Weili or use other methods, it will be much more difficult. Xiangju said, then how did you do it? How can we guarantee that we will be able to deal with the Weili if they come? Feng Du said, there is a person in the void who is connected to the spirit of creation. As long as we use his power, it won't be difficult to draw that person to the Weili. With the power of God's retribution, that person's power will definitely be limited. As for how to deal with that person, he was very conceited as he said, with me here, I will be able to deal with it. Xiangju squinted his eyes. Hongdo was undoubtedly talking about the purple-robed Taoist. No one else should know about this except for him, but he did not expect Hongdo to be able to see through it. He was indeed impressive. Even though his thoughts were hard to understand, his power could not be faked. Zhuang, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said, you are right. Right now, the power of God's retribution can still be used as a hindrance. No matter how powerful it is to lure the Weili, we can predict it. When the power of God's retribution weakens, it will be even more difficult to deal with it. Hun Wu looked around and said, Feng Du, you are doing this for our benefit. Even though we are weak and can't be of much help, if we stop you, it will make people wonder what our intentions are. Xiangju looked at the two of them. He did not expect them to agree at this time. Now that they had made their stance clear, it was useless even if he and Wei Ming objected. Otherwise, Hongdo might deal with them first. Since they could not stop him, they had to think of another way. He thought for a moment and said, since you already have the idea to do this, then we should gather all the forces in the void desolation. The Taoist Shenyuan is powerful, and he also has Busu Tian and many other places of creation. If we can get him here, then we can succeed. He wanted to encourage everyone to force Zhang Yan to join in. If Zhang Yan did not agree, then they could deal with him first. If Zhang Yan agreed, then they would have a higher chance of subduing the spirit of creation. But Hongdo waved his hand and said, there is no need. Even without the Taoist Shenyuan, I can still do it. Wei Ming said, the strength of the spirit of creation is hard to determine. Whether we can successfully summon it now and whether it can face the enemy after it is summoned is unknown. Since we want to plot against it, then we should gather all our strength and wait for it, hoping to strike it down in one strike. To be frank, if we lose this opportunity, we won't have another chance to come again. Hongdo sneered and said, I don't need others to teach me how to do things. He looked around at everyone and said, I have made up my mind. Don't try to persuade me anymore. Otherwise, I will see you as the spirit of creation. After he said this, no one dared to say anything else. Based on his way of doing things, no one would think that he was joking. He would really fight them. Xiangju looked gloomy. Hongdo was stubborn, unless they could work together to stop this. However, they had tried so hard to invite Hongdo to join them, just to use him against the Taoist Shenyuan. If they fought each other first, wouldn't it be a joke? Now that the three places of creation belonged to Hongdo, and with Heng Wu and Ji Zhuang on his side, even if he and Wei Ming went up, they would only be humiliating themselves. He sighed in his heart. Since they could not stop it, they could only go with it. At this moment, Wei Ming said, Don't worry, my friend. It is not time to be certain. Xiangju was surprised and said, Oh? What do you mean, my friend? Is there a chance to turn things around? Wei Ming said, Although Feng Du thinks this must be done, the Taoist Shenyuan may not agree to it. We just need to leak this out. If he doesn't do anything, then it's fine. But if he does, then we can fight him. Xiangju shook his head and said, Why would he fight me head-on? But you are right, there is no harm in giving it a try. He finally understood how some people's minds worked. He simply couldn't fathom them. Perhaps this time, it would be as he wished? So he secretly sent a message to Bushutian. As long as Zhang Yan saw it, he would know what happened. It all depended on Bushutian's reaction. Seeing that no one said anything else, Taoist Feng Du said, Since this is settled, I will first go and capture the Weili incarnation of the spirit of creation. Ji Zhuang said, There is no need to trouble you for such a small matter. I will go and bring him back. Taoist Feng Du said, Then go and come back quickly. Ji Zhuang bowed and left the place of creation. He took out the creation Pauline in his hand and plucked a lotus petal. With a flick of his finger, the petal shattered instantly. But the Whaley did not disappear. Instead, it went to a source. If the master of the creation Pauline was still alive, he could trace the Whaley back to the person. But if the master noticed it in advance, he could take it back with a thought, and the trail would be broken. But the Whaley of the Taoist in purple was too far away from the true Vedanta, so he did not notice it. When Ji Zhuang identified the direction of the Whaley, he turned his consciousness and appeared in front of a frozen world. The Whaley fell and rotated. The frozen world dissolved layer by layer as if its outer shell was peeled off. The Taoist in purple suddenly felt that the place where he was hiding was destroyed. He was surprised, but he recognized the person. He said, "So it is Taoist Ji Zhuang. Why did you destroy my frozen world?" Ji Zhuang said, "There is someone who wants to see you. Come with me." The Taoist in purple said coldly, "You want to see me but use this method. How unique. I wonder who are you talking about? Taoist Xiangjue or Taoist Xianyuan?" Ji Zhuang did not explain to him. He only said, "You will know when you get there." Once he released the Whaley, the Taoist in purple could not resist at all. His strength was seized by Ji Zhuang. In a trance, he felt that he had landed in a strange place, and there were several Vedantas standing around him. He suddenly realized something, but he remained calm on the surface. He said, "So it is Taoist friends who have invited me. You could have just told me in advance. Why do you have to resort to this?" The surrounding Vedanta were silent. Hong Du stood on the high platform and said disdainfully, "Why do you need to be polite when dealing with the spirit of creation?" The Taoist in purple looked at Xiangjue and admitted, "Yes, I am indeed the Whaley of the spirit of creation. But you don't have to treat me like this. You need to know that I am not on the same side as the original. What the original wants to do is not what I want to do." Hong Du sneered, "Don't use such words to cover up. You don't want to do it, but if you really want to do it, you have to do it. Even if you are really not on the same side as the original, just because you are born to be my enemy, there is no wrong in taking you." Ji Zhuang also said, "You don't have such thoughts now because you are not Whaley enough. If the Whaley is stronger than us, will you still be like this? I'm afraid that by then, you will be thinking about how to rob us and complete your own Tao." The Taoist in purple was speechless. Ji Zhuang had hit the nail on the head. He was now dormant purely because he was not strong enough. If he had the ability of the original, he would not be willing to be lonely. A cold smile appeared on his face. Even so, he did not need to be afraid. Even if he was scattered or turned into nothingness, as long as the original Whaley still existed in the void, he would be reunited. This person could not do anything to him. Hung Wu asked, "Fellow Taoist Fengdu, what should we do next?" Hong Du said, "You all work together and capture the Whaley. Then, try to make the original Whaley fall. When the spirit of creation falls to you, I will deal with it." The Taoist in purple was shocked. He somewhat understood why the other party asked him to come. But the key was not the plan itself, but the fact that this person did not hide anything from him. This meant that the other party was not afraid of the original knowing. Then what should he do? In fact, he soon realized that it was not up to him to think about it. He only felt for Whaley pressing down on him, and then he lost consciousness. Chapter 22-27. Ever since Zhang Yan returned from Hongdu, he had been paying attention to this person's actions. When he saw him gather people, he had thought that this person would lead a group of people to cause trouble for him like Xiangju and Ji Zhuang. He wasn't the slightest bit afraid of such a matter. Originally, he'd already made sufficient preparations to fight them. Moreover, two great virtue had returned in one go this time, so they would definitely leave behind their inheritance in the land of creation. Thus, Yen Yen would obtain two more opponents, and he was extremely happy to see this happen. However, he immediately saw Xiangju's divine will, which recorded Fengdu's every move since his arrival. After reading it, he was slightly surprised. He did not expect that Hongdu's true purpose this time was to attract a portion of the Whaley spirit of creation to return and then steal their Taoist techniques. However, putting aside whether Hongdu could accomplish this, What was very interesting was that no one suspected that Hongdu was borrowed by the spirit of creation. If that was really the case, then he was trying to summon the spirit of creation back. However, when he thought about it again, these Vedanta might have thought of this, but no one dared to bring it up. This was because they all knew what kind of person Hongdu was. Once they brought up this question, it would be equivalent to going against him. Before the enemy arrived, they would probably fight amongst themselves. He pondered for a moment. Fengdu's actions were not very rash. Now that more and more Weili had returned, the robbery power had become much thinner. If this kind of action were to happen again, it was likely that most of the Weili would return. Therefore, taking the initiative to solve the problem now instead of waiting for the spirit of creation to attack was not a bad idea. However, in terms of timing, it was slightly brought forward. At this moment, the robbery power was still trapping the spirit of creation and the other Weili. Even if they were to deliberately guide them back, the power that would return would be extremely limited. There was indeed a chance of success in killing this person like this. Most importantly, this person now had the conditions to do this. In the past, there had been people who wanted to do this, but they did not have enough power. However, the spirit of creation was not easy to deal with, so there was a certain degree of risk in this move. Xiangju's purpose in sending him the message was obvious. He had called Hongdu to Juyu because he wanted Hongtu to lead the others to snatch Bushutian. However, now that he found out that Hongdu's actions were contrary to his original intentions, he was powerless to stop it. Hence, he hoped that Hongdu would jump out and stop this matter after he found out about it. In this way, the two sides could fight together and achieve their original goal in disguise. Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. He would not do such a thing. It was not that he was afraid of this person, nor was he afraid of falling into Xiangju's trap. If he wanted to stop him, he would have done so when this person summoned Fengdu. Ever since he saw through the changes in the Dao technique, although he was still wary of the spirit of creation, he wasn't as strict as before. It was only a matter of time before he returned. Furthermore, without fighting, how could one improve their Dao techniques? Whether it was Fengdu or the spirit of creation, both of them could be considered as opponents. The difference was that the conflict between one side stemmed from the ownership of the essence qi of creation, while the other was a battle of fundamental Dao techniques. The spirit of creation needed to devour the great virtue to complete itself, and the great virtue could also obtain what it wanted from the spirit of creation. This time, if the incarnation of the spirit of creation could be destroyed, everyone who participated in the battle would definitely benefit from it. And if this person was no match for it, he could still intervene to remedy the situation. However, he could not rule out another situation. That was, no one could do anything to the other, and the incarnation of the spirit of creation that returned was very likely to be like the purple-clothed Taoist. It would regard itself as the master and not want to see the original replace itself. He had an inexplicable feeling in his heart that this was not his own speculation, but it was very likely to happen. If this was the case, it had actually inadvertently played the role of delaying the return of the spirit of creation. He changed his mind. With Taoist Fengdu's style, he might not have thought so far ahead. He was probably just following his heart. However, the choice he made was undoubtedly the most beneficial for him at the moment. It seemed that he was very much looking forward to this person's next reaction. After Xiangju sent out his divine will, he waited there silently. However, when Hongdu ordered everyone to receive the spirit of creation Weili, there was still no movement from Zhang Yan. He knew that Zhang Yan would not come over to do anything, and he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. However, after thinking for a while, another idea popped up in his mind. He used his divine will to transmit a message. Fellow Taoist Wei Ming, in order to prevent any unforeseen events, we should retrieve the lotus of good fortune. Wei Ming immediately knew his intention and said, "Fellow Taoist, you want to see if Taoist Xianyuan will mobilize a lot of people for us to take back this Pauline?" Xiangju said, "Exactly. If he comes, fellow Taoist Fengdu will deal with him. If he doesn't come and miss this opportunity, he won't say anything." Wei Ming agreed, "We can give it a try." He paused and said, "Why don't we call fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang to do it together?" Xiangju said, "All right." However, when Wei Ming spoke to Ji Zhuang, he replied, "Fellow Taoists, you can go and get it yourself. I don't have any intention of doing so right now." The two of them thought that he was still holding a grudge over what happened before, so they didn't try to persuade him anymore. In an instant, two Spirit of Creation Pauline appeared beside them. They silently checked and found that the robbery power in the Pauline had already been dissolved. At the same time, they also noticed that a Pauline appeared beside Jizhuang Daoren, and they thought that he had changed his mind. Hongdu suddenly looked down and said, "What are you guys doing?" Xiangju cupped his hands and said, "We thought that because we need to deal with the Spirit of Creation later, the Weili might not be enough, so we called back the Pauline first, just in case." Hongdu snorted and said, "All of you, return the Bao Lian immediately." Xiangju and Wei Ming were stunned. Xiangju said, "Fellow Taoist, what do you mean?" Hongdu sneered and said, "Don't think I don't know that these two Pauline flowers fell into the hands of Taoist Xianyuan because you lost to him. Now they are already his. How can we not keep our word? If I bring back the Spirit of Creation Weili and leave it be, what will you think of me?" He said the last half of his sentence casually, but the four of them were terrified. They were really afraid that he would do such a thing. Wei Ming knew that with Xiangju's temper he couldn't go against him at this moment, so he sighed and said, "This is not what I thought. We are just thinking. Since we are going to deal with the Spirit of Creation, I think fellow Taoist Xianyuan won't mind." He looked at Xiangju and said, "Fellow Taoist, if he comes looking for us, we will return it." But Taoist Fengdu didn't listen to them at all. He just waved his sleeve and sent the Pauline back to where it came from. Then he said with disdain, "If I destroy the Spirit of Creation, I will bring you guys to get it back. But I will get it back in a fair fight, not in such a sneaky way." Xiangju was unhappy, but he could only endure it at this moment. At this moment he looked around and saw that the Pauline in Ji Zhuang's hand was still next to him. He couldn't help but be startled and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you still have the Pauline in your hand?" Ji Zhuang said in a low voice, "This was sent back by Taoist Xianyuan. I'm afraid that is why fellow Taoist Fengdu didn't return it." Xiangju and Wei Ming couldn't help but look a little unhappy. Ji Zhuang getting back the Pauline not only reflected the unwisdom of their actions just now, but also made them a joke. Zhang Yan had also sensed that the two treasured lotuses had been taken back, and he had already expected this to happen. After all, the only reason he had taken the treasured lotuses was to capture the qi within them. Now that he had achieved his goal, it did not matter even if the lotuses were immediately taken back. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that he only asked for the item. So Wei Ming and Xiangju broke their promise. In the end, this matter would only damage their own reputation. On the other hand, Ji Zhuang remained motionless and refused to do it. This was worthy of praise, so he simply took the initiative to send it back. But unexpectedly, just a moment later, the two Pauline flowers appeared outside of Bu Su Tian. It was obvious that the Weili that followed the Pauline all the way here was from Fengdu. They were undoubtedly sent back by someone else. He smiled. This person was quite interesting. Under the guidance of Xiangju, Wei Ming, and the other two, the power belonging to the Spirit of Creation immediately began to move. But just now, the void desolation had been broken once, and the robbery power was in the process of gathering. The trapped Weili inside were also intertwined with each other, so it was not a matter of time for the Spirit of Creation's avatar to fall into Zhuyu. But it would not take too long here, especially when all the Weili were exerting their power in one place. It made the speed of the power seeping into Zhuyu even faster. When the Spirit of Creation's power also consciously began to cooperate, it might return at any time. At first, the four of them did not feel anything strange when they guided this power, but as the power gradually increased, they felt a heavy pressure spreading on their bodies. There was a feeling that told them to get away from it as soon as possible, or else there would be no result. The four of them were shocked. Just now, they knew that guiding the Weili would cause their Taoism to be seized by the other party. It was just that the Weili of the Spirit of Creation was not enough, so they did not suffer any losses. But if this continued, when the Weili grew stronger, there might be unexpected situations. At this moment, everyone instinctively wanted to retreat, and even the action of guiding the Weili suddenly became much weaker. Hongdu saw the situation clearly. The reason why he did not make a move was because he had already foreseen this moment. At this moment, he snorted, and with a wave of his sleeve, he dispelled the malice. He did not directly target the Weili, but used his own Taoism to decipher the Taoism within. And suddenly, everyone realized that not only did Hongdu's action reduce the pressure, but he could also use this to continue to understand the changes of the Taoism of the spirit of creation. Even if the Taoism could not be seized, but if this continued, they would be able to know themselves and their enemy in advance. Unconsciously, they were very excited. Xiangju was a little surprised. Hongdu always did things on a whim. It was impossible to say that this was planned in advance. He should have directly made the most suitable choice based on his own intuition. He thought about it. If this was the case, he might really be able to deal with a part of the spirit of creation first. Of course, the premise was that his intuition did not make any mistakes. Chapter 22-28. At this time, Zhang Yan was watching the movements of Fengdu and the others, as well as observing the Weili of the spirit of creation. However, his goal was different from Fengdu's. The main point was not to decipher the changes in the Tao, but to try to identify at this time, to see if there was anyone among the Vedanta who had returned previously that was the body of the spirit of creation. If there was, then it would be eliminated as soon as possible to prevent any unforeseen events. After watching for a long time, he did not find any abnormalities, but this did not mean that the body did not really exist, because if it was swallowed by the spirit of creation and manifested again, then it would be completely the Tao technique of the Vedanta's body. However, these people were ultimately connected to the spirit of creation. Even though it was difficult to see them now, when the mighty power of the spirit of creation arrived, it would most likely trigger some sort of resonance. At that time, they would be able to see them very clearly. With Fengdu bearing the pressure, Xiangjue and the others' movements of pulling the Weili gradually increased. However, just when the situation was about to stabilize, the four of them felt an inexplicable emptiness in front of them, and suddenly, they realized that the Taoist in purple had disappeared. Not only that, without the source of pulling, the spirit of creation's Weili that had already fallen into silence suddenly became restless, as if it was about to disperse in all directions. Once this happened, not being able to pull back these forces was secondary, and their previous efforts would also be in vain. Fengdu snorted, and with a backhand he suppressed these Weili, leaving them nowhere to go. Ji Zhuang took out the creation Pauline, and calculated according to the source of the Weili, only to feel empty, and said, "Looks like this person has collapsed." Xiangjue, Wei Ming and the others subconsciously looked at Fengdu. They did not know why this happened, but if the Taoist in purple had collapsed, then this matter could not continue. It all depended on whether Fengdu would continue to hold on for the sake of his reputation. Hongdu glanced downwards and said, "Don't panic. This is his own trick. It's nothing more than a transformation of the Tao technique of the spirit of creation. He's not really seeking his own death. Not long after, he will reform again. If we can catch him earlier, we can catch him again later." Xiangju sternly said, "Fellow Taoist, I have a question. What if it collapses again after being captured? What if it doesn't reassemble? Or if it doesn't recover?" Hongdu said, "Don't worry about it. I have already understood the secret behind it and I have a way to restrain it. When we capture it again, all of you can do what you did before and this situation will not happen again." At that moment, in another part of the void, the figure of the purple-robed Taoist appeared out of nowhere. He opened his eyes and looked around. Although his body had been destroyed once, he remembered clearly what had happened before he lost consciousness. He changed his mind. The last time he was found, it was very likely that the other party had used the Weili of the spirit of creation Pauline to guide him. Therefore, he must eliminate this hidden danger now. He waved his hand and took the item back. However, he also knew that with the means of those virtuous benevolent virtues, if they focused on finding him, they would definitely be able to capture him. However, this didn't mean that he couldn't do anything. The reason he was able to escape from the joint suppression of the four virtuous benevolence was because he had used the righteous mighty force in advance to make arrangements. Once he was captured by an outsider, the righteous mighty force would self-destruct. However, the response from the righteous mighty force wouldn't come immediately, which was why it took so long. This time, he could use the same trick again. The more spirit of creation Wei Li entered, the less likely he would collapse. If there was a chance, he might be able to use this to gather more Wei Li and push himself to the same level as the virtuous benevolent virtues. Even if he could not fight against those people, it would not be a problem for him to escape. Ji Zhuang saw that the Pauline in his hand had disappeared and immediately knew that the purple-robed Taoist had returned. Just as he was about to calculate, Feng Du's gaze suddenly looked towards a certain direction. He sneered and reached out to grab something. A figure appeared in the void. The purple-robed Taoist was actually captured by the Wei Li and brought here. Ji Zhuang, Wei Ming, Heng Wu, Xiang Ju and the others saw this and immediately pressed their Wei Li to prevent the person from escaping again. Hong Du calculated and struck out a ray of spiritual light. The mighty cultivators of the spirit refinement realm had long jumped out of the world. This source of light was his Wei Li and should not have been reduced. However, at this moment, under the influence of the Wei Li, it was slowly disappearing. He said, "When this light is completely worn out, the spirit of creation will fall into the possession of everything." Everyone looked at him and their hearts trembled. The speed of the spiritual light's decline was not slow. At this moment, the Wei Li of the spirit of creation was already very close to you. Zhang Yan had previously noticed that the purple-robed Taoist's Wei Li had suddenly disappeared. He had seen similar scenes twice before and knew that the Taoist must have self-destructed in order to escape. However, he knew that this would not be of much use unless the Taoist stopped condensing his figure. However, this was not something that the Taoist could control. As expected, not long after, Xiang Ju and the others continued to summon the Wei Li. This meant that the Taoist did not really escape and was still captured. Thus, he made some calculations. Based on Bu Su's time, it would take about 50 years for the mighty clone of the creation spirit to descend. This was extremely fast, and it would pass in the blink of an eye. All he had to do was to wait for it to arrive. However, he let Feng Du and Heng Wu enter Yu in the hope that they could compete with each other's Dao teachings so that they could observe more Dao techniques. However, this person was focused on summoning and seemed to have no intention to leave behind Dao teachings. He pondered for a while. If that was the case, then he would give them a reminder. He immediately passed down an edict, requesting the followers of Yen's sect to find a way to slightly suppress the Luo sect and Xing sect. After Yen's sect received the edict from the Dharma Inheritance Stone Tablet, he immediately changed his usual confrontational style. He secretly mobilized people and suddenly launched an attack against the two sections. The Luo sect and Xing sect were caught off guard and lost a large portion of the territory they had previously occupied. They thought that Yen's sect had started to launch a counterattack after many years of preparation. The higher-ups of the two sects were well aware of the gap between them and Yen's sect. They panicked and hurriedly prayed to the sect ancestor to ask for help. Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang immediately sensed something. However, Xiang Ju could not do anything because he did not have the spirit of creation Pauline. He could only use his spirit to transmit a message. Fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang, now that I do not have Pauline in my hands, it is difficult for me to interfere with the land of creation. I hope that fellow Taoist can look after my followers for the sake of the past. Ji Zhuang pondered for a while. Although there was some discord between the two due to the matter of Feng Du, he also knew that the two sects were relying on each other now. It was indeed necessary to lose Xing sect. He said, now that fellow Taoist Wei Ming has offered the land of creation to fellow Taoist Feng Du, and fellow Taoist Heng Wu has yet to establish his Taoist teachings, fellow Taoist might as well ask them. If our four sects all leave their Taoist teachings in that territory and support each other, then we will not be easily shaken by the sects under Taoist Xuanyuan's rule. Xiang Ju agreed, this is reasonable. Let me talk about this matter with the two Taoist friends. He immediately discussed this matter with Wei Ming and Heng Wu, but Wei Ming refused. Although he had offered the 3 places of fortune, Hong Do did not do anything to his sect. In fact, he did not even ask about it. Under such circumstances, there was no need for him to meddle in this matter. Hung Wu, on the other hand, was interested in this matter. After Weili's return, he also knew that as long as he passed down his own Taoist teachings, he could trigger the spirit of creation and integrate it into his own Taoist techniques, then he would be able to observe the missing part of the great Tao. However, his strength was weak previously. He did not have the fragment of creation nor the land of creation, so there was no territory for him to pass down his Taoist teachings. Now that Xiang Ju took the initiative to invite him, he was very willing. As for whether this would offend Zhang Yan, he believed that if this person really did not allow the teachings of other sects to land in his territory, then the two of them would not be able to establish a foothold at all. There must be a reason here that he did not know, but he did not need to figure it out. It was fine as long as he could achieve his goal. He discussed with Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang for a while and decided to use the creation Pauline to create a Taoist technique called Zhe sect and pass it down. This Taoist technique required 2 or more people to cultivate at the same time, and they had to support each other. If one person was enlightened, then everyone else would be enlightened. However, after entering the Taoist path, if something happened to one of the first chosen people, then the rest would be hindered, and it would be difficult for them to improve for a very long time. In short, this technique not only benefited but also needed to go through trials and tribulations together. That was why it was easy to get started, but if one wanted to improve, he would need to overcome more obstacles. Taoist Feng Du also noticed this action. He glanced at him, but this time he did not say anything to stop him. At this moment he was suppressing the changes in the purple-clothed Taoist Weili, so he did not have the time to care about such a small matter. However, he realized that as he studied and understood the Taoist technique, there was a gradual change in the divine will. He did not stop him, but only looked at him coldly. After a long time, he suddenly saw that there was an additional Taoist in his divine will. However, the figure was swaying, and his face was blurred. He knew that this was because he had come into contact with the Taoist technique of the spirit of creation too deeply, so it appeared in front of him. The spirit of creation's Weili had the ability to devour great virtue, so it was dangerous for him to come into contact with it. If he could not kill it, then as the infection spread, it would replace him, devour him, and even become a borrowed body. A hint of disdain appeared on his face. He blew out a breath, and the illusory figure was immediately blown away. However, there were still traces of black gas lingering there, and it did not dissipate. He did not care about this. As long as the Weili against the spirit of creation did not stop, these things could not be expelled. This was just a scabbard, and when the Weili fell into the possession of all things, it would be solved at once. Just as he was about to release his divine will, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. When he looked up, he found that the blurry figure had appeared there again. He was a little surprised, but then he sneered and pointed with his finger. The Taoist technique became non-existent, and the illusory figure disappeared in an instant. He waited for a while, and when he was sure that nothing was wrong, he retreated from it and continued to suppress the purple-clothed Taoist. However, he did not notice that there were traces of black gas drifting out from his back, and it gradually spread outwards, slowly invading the Weili of all the great virtues present. Chapter 22-29. In front of a realm gate, the light screen shook, and Patriarch Tai Hing walked out with a few disciples. He turned around and looked up at the spiritual light screen and praised, "The layout of the sect Yen is indeed extraordinary. I wonder which Yuan Zun did this." The disciple said, "There are rumors that," however, Tai Hing raised his hand and stopped him from continuing. "Don't make wild guesses about a Yuan venerate unless you have concrete evidence." The disciple was stunned and said humbly, "Patriarch, you're right, I was speaking nonsense." Patriarch Tai Hing observed for a while, and chatted with the disciple who guarded the altar for half a day, before leaving the altar with a few disciples. After those fellow Taoists who returned with him were freed or died, he went to the mountain and sea realm, and met the original eldest disciple's reincarnation, Wei Zihong. But now that he was Yuan Zun's disciple, his cultivation base and magic power were no longer inferior to his, and the karma connection between the two had long been severed, so he treated him as an equal. Although Wei Zihong's cultivation method had been improved by him, and was very different from the original, it was still passed down by Patriarch Tai Hing, so he was still very respectful to the latter. After staying in the Yao Yin clan for several years, he took in a few disciples, and traveled everywhere. After hundreds of years, he also wanted to live in peace, so he came to this realm famous for its magnificent scenery, and prepared to find a secluded place to stay. A few days later, the master and disciples walked to the bank of a large river. Patriarch Tai Hing looked around, and saw the scenery upstream and downstream. There were more than 10 big cities along the river, and the two sides were densely populated, with carriages, horses, and boats coming and going continuously. He nodded and praised. I've often heard people say that the sect Yen doesn't cultivate spiritual vigor, only cultivates itself, and is the first sect that violates the old ways. But I see that under its rule, there are abundant resources, and the people enjoy peace and happiness. Just this alone is a great merit. However, a disciple disagreed and said, "Ancestor, what the world thinks has nothing to do with me. Moreover, we don't need any merit to cultivate. Even the good deeds of the Yuhuan heavens have nothing to do with good or evil." Ancestor Tai Hing shook his head and said, "That's not right." He pointed at his chest and said, "The merit is in the heart. If the heart is righteous, then there is no evil. If there is no evil, then there is sincerity. If there is sincerity, then there will be no hindrance to cultivation. How can there be no connection?" A disciple was unconvinced and said, "Ancestor, if that evil person really thinks that doing evil is beneficial to him, doesn't that mean that he can also use this opportunity to improve his cultivation?" Old Ancestor Tai Hing said seriously, "There are people like that, but if I see them, I will kill them." The disciple grumbled in his heart. After talking for so long, wasn't it all about strength? Old Ancestor Tai Hing saw through their thoughts and said, "I'm not joking. Let me ask you, when you cultivate, do you want to be surrounded by people who cultivate good deeds or people who cultivate evil karma?" The disciples couldn't help but look at each other. One of them said, "Ancestor, it's better for those who cultivate good deeds. Who would want to see someone in the same sect who cultivated evil deeds? Wouldn't we have to be on guard all the time? Then what's the point of cultivating?" Another disciple shuddered and said, "If there really is such a person by your side, you will fall into a trap. You won't even know who did it. Even those demonic cultivators wouldn't dare to stay with such a person." Old Ancestor Tai Hing said, "That's right. Good is the will of the human heart, evil is the will of the human heart, so it can't be allowed to exist in the world. Even if there is no me, there will still be others who will kill me. Even if you don't ask others to do good and don't do evil in your life, you will still have a clear conscience. It's also beneficial to cultivate with you." He pointed down and said, "The sect is set up in the mortal world so that the people can live in peace. Disciples will have very few obstacles in their hearts when cultivating. The only thing they are limited by is their comprehension." The disciples fell into deep thought. Because this place was too close to the mortal world, it was not suitable to be a place to cultivate. Old Ancestor Tai Hing led the group to the plateau and finally came to a mountain ridge. He stood there and looked at the heaven and earth. He saw that on one side of the mountain ridge, the mountains and rivers were beautiful and graceful like a beautiful woman, and on the other side, it was majestic like a towering mountain and surging clouds. He was not surprised and saw a large lake at the foot of the mountain. Not far from the lake, there was a wide and flat mountain platform, just like a natural place to teach Tao. He couldn't help but stroke his beard and nodded, "This is a good place for me to build my abode." After deciding on this place as his abode, he used his supernatural power to move the mountain rocks and build a temple. In less than half a month, he had built a blessed land of immortals. Old Ancestor Tai Hing taught here every day, and when he was free, he would go sightseeing. He also subdued a big whale and rode it to fish every day. He lived a very comfortable life. Although his cultivation was high, he knew that without Zhou Huanyu and Jade, he wouldn't be able to break through that layer of barrier. He was also calm about this. As long as he had Ziqing's spiritual opportunity, then his lifespan would not decline. There were very few cultivators who could cultivate to his level, so what was there for him to be dissatisfied with? Living a free and unfettered life was what immortals should do. One day, when he was sailing on the sea with his disciples, a disciple suddenly said, "Old ancestor, there's something disciple doesn't understand." Old ancestor Tai Heng said gently, "Speak." The disciple said, "Old ancestor, why didn't you accept sect leader Wei's invitation and stay in Yaoyin clan? The scenery there is not bad, and Yaoyin clan's disciples can be considered old ancestors' disciples, so why did you come to this remote place?" Old ancestor Tai Heng said patiently, "Although sect leader Wei was my disciple in his previous life, he has become a disciple of Yuan Zun in this life, so he naturally has nothing to do with me. Moreover, the Yaoyin clan today, other than the reputation, everything else is built by sect leader Wei, so how can I be shameless?" The disciple said, "But old ancestor, what's so good about this place? Why not choose Kunsher continent? There is endless spiritual opportunity there, and there are many people who share the same Tao." Old ancestor Tai Heng smiled and said, "Kunsher continent is a land of dispute. I'm a secluded cultivator, and I don't want to compete with others. Since you're here, even if you're not used to living here, you have to endure it. Once you've succeeded in your cultivation, I'll let you go." The disciples said in unison, "We're willing to follow old ancestor." Old ancestor Tai Heng was about to say something when he suddenly paused. He pinched his fingers together and calculated, then said thoughtfully, "Some old friends will come to visit in a few days. The things in the cave are too shabby, and it's not good to entertain guests." He flicked his fingers, and a few rays of light flew down. "Go and find what you need." He only left one disciple by his side, and after sending the others away, he cupped his hands and bowed in a certain direction, saying, "Since fellow Taoist has come, why don't you show yourself?" As soon as he finished speaking, a figure came out of the atmosphere. It was a young man in white, wearing a large robe and a tall hat. He returned the greeting and said, "This humble one is Qiu Jiao. Greetings, fellow Taoist Tai Heng." Old ancestor Tai Heng made an inviting gesture and said, "Fellow Taoist, please take a seat." Qiu Jiao thanked him, then lifted his robe and sat down. He went straight to the point and said, "Fellow Taoist, please don't blame me for coming here. I'm here on someone's request to invite fellow Taoist." Old ancestor Tai Heng stroked his beard and thought for a moment, then said, "I heard that there's an innate demon in Bu Su Tian called Heavenly Venerable, and he's as powerful as Yuan Zun. Is he related to fellow Taoist?" Qiu Jiao looked at him and was slightly surprised. He sighed and said, "Fellow Taoist, as expected of a sect's founder. My origin is very similar to your guess." He nodded and said sincerely, "I see that fellow Taoist is not successful in the mortal world, so why don't you come to our side? I know what fellow Taoist is lacking right now. In the human path, there's no hope, but in our side, there's some hope." Old ancestor Tai Heng said seriously, "I appreciate fellow Taoist's kindness, but everyone has their own ambitions. I'm afraid I can't accept your kindness." Qiu Jiao wasn't angry when he heard old ancestor Tai Heng's refusal. He only said, "Fellow Taoist, you're a demon W, so in the human path, you're still an outsider." Old ancestor Tai Heng laughed and said, "I used to cultivate mystic, demonic, and Yao Taoist at the same time. Now that I've severed my mortal body, how can fellow Taoists see me as a demon? At my level, why bother with these things? Besides, you don't seem to lack people like me, so you're just thinking about how to use my identity, right?" Qiu Jiao smiled and didn't say anything. He didn't try to persuade old ancestor Tai Heng anymore. He threw a talisman on the ground and stood up. He said, "Whenever fellow Taoist is interested, you can use this to find me." He bowed and left. Just like how he came, his body slowly merged with the atmosphere. Old ancestor Tai Heng looked at the talisman, but he didn't touch it. He let it land on the ground and stood up. He said, "We're going back too." That disciple said worriedly, "Old ancestor, are those demons targeting old ancestor?" Old ancestor Tai Heng comforted him, "There's no need to frown. I'm guessing that this person will look for other people besides me. He won't target me alone." The disciple said nervously, Are those demons trying to cause trouble? Old ancestor Tai Hing laughed and said, "What trouble can the demons and beasts nowadays cause? I think this matter is related to the Yen sect. I heard that this sect is killing demons and beasts everywhere. These beasts are suppressed to the point that they can't breathe. That's why they have no choice but to look for helpers everywhere." The disciple quickly said, "Since these demons are dying, then old ancestor can't go." Old ancestor Tai Hing said, "I didn't plan to do that. Living a carefree life is better than fighting and killing." A few days later, the disciples who went out to search for food and drinks returned one after another. Old ancestor Tai Hing ordered them to prepare a banquet. When it was almost noon, there was a flash of light. A Taoist with 2 swords on his back arrived on a cloud. He bowed and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Old ancestor Tai Hing bowed and said, "Fellow Taoist Hong Yu, long time no see." He turned to the side and invited Hong Yu, "Please take a seat." Hong Yu followed him to a seat and drank 3 cups of wine with old ancestor Tai Hing without saying a word. Then, he put down the jade cup and asked, "Fellow Taoist, have you sensed anything recently?" Ancestor Tai Hing nodded slowly. For the past few years, whenever he sat in meditation, he could feel a force calling out to him. It was as if he only had to follow this force and he would be able to go to another world, and he might even be able to obtain great fortune. Hong Yu said, "I think this place is related to the place we ascended to." He looked up and looked straight at old ancestor Tai Hing. "I suspect that the reason you called us back is to fight for the ownership of the origin jade." Old ancestor Tai Hing said, "Fellow Taoist, do you want to go and give it a try?" Hong Yu nodded and said as if it was a matter of course, "We cultivators strive for a trace of heaven's secret. Since there's a chance, why wouldn't I go?" Old ancestor Tai Hing raised his hand and smiled. "Then I hope fellow Taoist will be able to get what you want." Hong Yu glanced at him and didn't say anything. After he bowed, he turned into a ray of light and flew away. Chapter 2230. In the depths of Shaowei Lake on the Xin continent, in a secret palace of the Lishan sect, Matriarch Yu Ling had been cultivating ever since she returned to the sect. During the past few hundred years, she had felt that her cultivation had progressed rapidly, and that she hadn't encountered any obstacles in her cultivation. One of the main reasons was that the mountain and sea realm was flourishing with spirit qi. There was plenty of spirit qi here, enough for her to cultivate freely. Furthermore, when she had been trapped in the world of imprisonment, she had gained something. At the very least, her Tao heart had been tempered. Another reason was that the mountain and sea realm was now filled with Tao discussions. There was no lack of mortal metamorphosis almighty beings who would impart their experiences and techniques. In the past, the various sects had kept such things to themselves, and could only rely on the teachings of the sects to pass them on and exchange them with other Taoists. Now, although they weren't freely available, there were many more ways to acquire them. As of now, she had severed her past body and entered the second stage. She was currently planning for her next step. However, this was a bit difficult. Cultivators who had severed their past and future bodies were few and far between. Furthermore, at this point in her cultivation, all of her previous accumulations had been used up. Just as she was thinking, a strange expression appeared on her face, and she muttered, "It's happening again." Over the past few years, she had always felt a power calling out to her. Furthermore, there was some sort of destiny involved, and if she could obtain it, she might be able to reach a higher realm. However, her cultivation wasn't strong enough, and even if she went, she would most likely get nothing. Furthermore, she had always been on guard against the master of the world of imprisonment, and didn't want to go there again. Therefore, she didn't pay much attention to it. After a while, the feeling faded. Just as she was about to continue sitting, a disciple came to report, "Matriarch, there is a Taoist outside. He says he is an old friend of yours." Yu Ling had already sensed who it was and said, "Invite him in for a chat." Not long after, Hong Yu walked in. Yu Ling greeted him, and after a few words of greeting she asked, "Fellow Taoist, why have you come to my place?" Hong Yu said, "Have you sensed any destiny from beyond the heavens?" Yu Ling's expression was indifferent. "Of course I've sensed it. However, I have no fate with this trip, and I have no desire to seek it. Hong Yu looked at her, and knew that she had made her decision. He didn't say anything more, but bowed again and left. Yuling didn't ask him to stay. He just stared at the void with his hands behind his back. No one knew what he was thinking. After Hong Yu left Li Mountain Sect, he headed towards the far west. Very quickly he came to a wide flat land. He knew that this place was originally barren, but now it was covered by a lush forest. It was like a green carpet that stretched to the ends of the world. In the very center, there was a huge tree, and it was the place where Taoist Pan Chi cultivated. After hundreds of years, coiling Qi had recovered a lot, but it had not returned to its original level. However, his past knowledge and even cultivation experience were all there, so it was only a matter of time. At this moment, he was fiddling with a flower seedling in high spirits, but he seemed to have sensed something. He walked to the door and waved his sleeve to remove the restriction, only to see a Taoist with 2 swords on his back standing there. He couldn't help but reveal a pleasantly surprised expression, and he raised his hand to greet. "So, fellow Taoist Hong Yu is here, why didn't you inform me in advance? Come sit in the inner room." Hong Yu cupped his hands and said, "Sorry for the disturbance." Pan Chi smiled. "What are you saying? When old friends meet, how can we not receive good tea?" At this time, Hong Yu seemed to want to say something, but Pan Chi waved his hand at him, smiling. "I know that fellow Taoist is here for something, but if you are not in a hurry, let me first show my hospitality as a host, then we can talk about other things. How about it?" Hong Yu glanced at him and nodded his head. Pan Chi immediately gave an order to a servant boy beside him. After a while, a servant came over with a tea tray. There were 2 green jade teacups on the tray, and a few tender and fine leaves could be seen floating in the tea. White steam rose from the teacups, forming the shape of a dragon horse. It galloped in the air, and from time to time, the roars of dragons and neighs of horses could be heard. Pan Chi reached out to hold the jade cup in front of him, lifting his sleeve and saying, "Fellow Taoist, please." Hong Yu thanked him, picking up the cup and taking a sip. His expression was slightly moved. This tea actually contained clear purple medicine, and it was rich and rich. After drinking it, it spread throughout his body, and he didn't need to refine it at all. He couldn't help but nod and say, "Good tea." Pan Chi said, "It is good that fellow Taoist likes it. This is a tea tree that I personally planted after coming here. After hundreds of years, it has finally grown a bit. Later, I will have a disciple give some to fellow Taoist, so that you can enjoy it when you go back." The Taihao lineage's method was originally good at planting. In terms of methods to nurture and refine spirit tea, besides the mighty upper realm cultivators, there weren't many places in the 10,000 worlds that could compare. The 2 of them talked about how they had parted, and then Pan Chi pulled Hong Yu out to the top of the tree. With their eyesight, they could see where the Shaoqing mountain gate was if they stood there and looked back. They could only see the boundless sword Qi shooting into the sky. Even the stars in the sky were torn apart. The 2 looked for a while, and then felt a slight pain in their eyes. They seemed to be able to feel several consciousnesses descending here, and then retracted. Their gazes moved again, and in a boundary slightly south, they saw a large-scale thundercloud. From time to time, they could see lightning flashing and lightning snakes slithering. Pan Chi said, "That is the boundary of Huanjin Temple. Under the leadership of Sect Master Zhang, this sect is also prospering. Although it is not as good as the Shaoqing sect, it is still a good atmosphere." Hong Yu glanced in the direction of the Lishan sect. The Qi there was like a blooming flower, but compared to the Shaoqing sect and Huanjin sect, it was still a far cry. At this time, Pan Chi reached up and pointed to the distant sky, saying, "Fellow Taoist, look over there." Hong Yu looked in the direction he was pointing, and saw that there were several heavenly stars there. At first glance, there was nothing strange, but when he looked again, he could see that there were vines connected to each other, and they were even extending to the heavenly stars in the distance. "This is," Pan Chi said, "the various sects are all grand and magnificent, and I am no weaker than any of them. Once these heavenly star pearls are all linked together, I will be able to build bridges, plant flowers and trees, move mountains and rivers, and create a land similar to the mountain and sea realm. That will be the foundation of the Taihao realm. Hongyu looked for a while and then nodded, saying, "Fellow Taoist, this is a great work." He could see that this was not only a cave, but also related to Pan Chi's own cultivation. After this place was successfully built, it was very likely that this person would be able to sever his past and future bodies. The two discussed the Tao on the top of the tree for several days, and then Pan Chi asked Hongyu why he came. Hongyu said, "Before coming here, I visited Tai Heng and Yu Ling, two Taoist friends. You are the last one." Pan Chi was startled and then slowly said, "Did Taoist friend come because of that feeling?" Hongyu said, "Yes, Taoist friend. Do you want to come with me?" Pan Chi sighed, "My cultivation has not recovered, and I fear it will be difficult for me to enter the heavenly gate. Taoist friend, you have found the wrong person." Hongyu said, "That feeling is intermittent and continuous. If I'm not wrong, those who entered the imprisoned world and then escaped should all have some sort of destiny. If Taoist friend really wants to seek the Tao, then there is no harm in going a few days later." Pan Chi couldn't help but feel a bit moved, but then he seemed to think of something. He looked up and said, "Taoist friend, do you really believe that it was destiny?" Hongyu said frankly, "There are no absolutes in this world." Pan Chi said, "Then Taoist friend still dares to go? Back then, you imprisoned me and turned me into a stone statue, unable to escape. Even if I go now, I fear it may not be as you wish." Hongyu said bluntly, "My generation cultivates to fight for a thread of fate. Even if we know there is danger, we must still try. Didn't you and I both come through like this? It is just that after that incident, Taoist friend, you have lost your drive." Pan Chi looked forward and said, "Taoist friend is right. I cultivate to seek immortality. Immortality is already in front of me, so what more can I ask for? Moreover, I know that my cultivation has reached this point, and my potential has been exhausted. I don't dare to ask for more." Hongyu said, "I have disturbed you for a long time. I will take my leave now." Pan Chi sincerely urged him to stay. "Taoist friend, it is rare for you to come here. Don't you want to stay for a few days?" Hongyu said, "No, Taoist friend has your Tao, and I have mine. Let us part here." Pan Chi said, "Wait a moment, Taoist friend." He gave an order to someone beside him, and a moment later, a disciple came over with a jade pot. With a thought, this thing floated in front of Hongyu. "Taoist friend, please accept this pot of tea." Hongyu didn't refuse. This tea could be used as a great medicine for Ziqing, and its effect was even better. He thanked him, bowed, and left on the clear light. In the void essence sea, inside the mystic space realm, Bai Wei's brows were tightly furrowed. In the past few hundred years, following the rise of the Yen sect, the demons and other races had become increasingly difficult to endure. It was fine if they obeyed the human Tao, but if they were unwilling to obey and did the slightest harm to the living, they would be executed. This also caused the other races to be unprecedentedly united. However, this was of no use. Before the glorious general trend of the human Tao, there was no room for resistance. Especially after Yuan Zhangqing refined the demon-suppressing heavenly net, killing demons and demons became abnormally easy. Even if it was a great demon, as long as a cultivator could gather a wisp of the demon's aura, then they could be killed. Many cultivators even used this as a threat to establish a contract with a great demon, commanding it to serve their sections. After all, demons that entered a sect, as long as they didn't harm people before and didn't do evil in the future, then they wouldn't be erased by the heavenly net. He had once had the intention to use karma to destroy this item, but the other was Zhang Yan's disciple. If he dared to have such thoughts, he would probably be discovered before he could carry them out. Now, he could only endure. Only when the 3 eras of human Tao had passed would there be a chance for the demons and other races to rise. Just as he was calculating like this, there was suddenly a trace of a feeling in his heart. This feeling seemed to be somewhat related to Zhou Huanyuan Jade. His expression shook. Could it be that another Yuan Jade was about to enter the world? However, after a series of calculations, he discovered that this was not the case. This opportunity actually originated from an unfathomable place beyond the heavens. No matter how he peered, he couldn't find any clues, and even felt like he was sinking into it. He couldn't help but shiver, and hurriedly withdrew his mind. As the true Yang Yuan Zun, a power that even he couldn't touch must be above his own. He could sense it, and perhaps it was intentionally leaked by the other. He thought about it carefully. At present, his own Tao was weak, and this was still a chance. He might as well send his disciples to try. Thus, he waved his sleeve, and 2 beams of spiritual light flew toward 2 disciples he was proud of. Chapter 22:31. After Bai Wei sent out the talisman, 2 disciples came in front of him. After carefully instructing them, he dismissed them. But after a while he felt that something was wrong. If he had sensed something here, then Deng Zhang and the 6 extraterrestrial demons might have also sensed it. Perhaps they had made some arrangements at this moment. If it was like that, then it would be better for them to inform each other beforehand, so as to avoid any discord from occurring before their sects could obtain fortune. Even though they came from different backgrounds, they still had to band together in order to survive when facing the Tao. When he thought of this, he used his divine will to communicate with Deng Zhang, Qi Yao and the others. As he had expected, they all sensed something and were preparing to arrange for their disciples to find the opportunity. However, after discussing with each other, they all believed that this place was likely to involve the forces of the upper echelons, so if something went wrong, their disciples might not be able to return. Regarding this, they were unperturbed. The opportunity of the Great Path was not so easy to fight for. If they could exchange a few disciples for a Zhou Huanyuan jade, then they would be very willing. Bu Su Heaven by Luo Heaven. Fu Qingming stood at the entrance of the temple, staring at the thousands of domains. He also felt a trace of unpredictable power, and he could clearly tell that it was likely related to the Zhou Huanyuan jade. It was just that after a few calculations he had no clue. Not only that, even his magic power was inexplicably reduced. He immediately suspected that this was the Weili of the upper realm cultivators. However, he was not like Bai Wei and the others who could only speculate in private. The situation here was unclear, but he could ask someone for advice. So with a thought, he left Bai Luo Heaven and went straight to Xinyuan Heaven. At this time, Zhang Yan was watching the qi activity of Hong Du and the others. He could see that the Weili of the spirit of creation was constantly descending and being carried away by them. On the surface, it seemed to be stable, but he had no way of knowing what was going on inside. It was not impossible to forcefully spy on them, but no matter who it was, no one would like their every move to be seen by others, and it was even more so for people like Feng Du. He was not afraid of Feng Du, but there was no need to deliberately provoke it. However, at this moment, he narrowed his eyes because he seemed to have noticed a trace of abnormality from everyone's aura. He pondered for a moment but did not do anything. Instead, he summoned the formation spirit before him and said, "If fellow Fu comes later, invite him in." The formation spirit received the order and arrived at the door of the main hall. After waiting for a while, he saw Fu Qingming coming from afar. He cupped his hands and said, "Hi Lord Fu, old master knows you're coming, so he ordered this lowly one to welcome you here. Please follow this lowly one." Fu Qingming nodded and said, "Thank you." He followed the array spirit into the hall, and after greeting Zhang Yan in the hall, he expressed his feelings. Zhang Yan said, "This power indeed came from a fellow Taoist. I've seen it before. This is indeed an opportunity for cultivators who have cut off their past and future bodies. However, it's not easy to obtain. If fellow Taoist has any arrangements, you must be careful." As soon as Fu Qingming heard this, he had an idea in his heart. He thought that he could send a few of his disciples there. It was not because he wanted to seize the jade of Zhou origin that might exist. He also knew that if there was no opportunity, it could not be forced. It was just that the Khanate demons and the extraterrestrial demons might have sensed it. If they sent their disciples there, he could think of a way to stop them from getting what they wanted. Since he understood the situation, he did not stay here for long. After sitting for a while, he left. Zhang Yan glanced at a certain place and withdrew his gaze. He was now focusing on the spirit of creation. The Whaley spread by the fellow Taoist was actually very weak, and it only involved the cultivators of the lower realm. Therefore, there was no need to pay too much attention to it. The Luo denomination's branch altar in Wanchen realm. Due to Zhang Yan's decree that day, the Luo denomination's occupied territories were constantly being lost under the sect Yan's power. When the Luo denomination and the Virtue denomination fought back, the sect Yan's branch altars were destroyed one by one. However, not long after, the situation was reversed. In the depths of the altar, a young cultivator with a square face was looking at the sky, motionless. With a bang, an old man knocked open the stone door and rushed in with wind pressure. He said in a suppressed voice, "Altar master, we can't hold on outside any longer." The young cultivator did not respond. Seeing this, the old man shouted again, "Altar master?" The young cultivator was still looking at the sky, saying something irrelevant. "Do you feel that this world is a little different?" The old man did not have the leisure to care about this. He said anxiously, "Altar master, I only know that if Altar master does not show up, the sky outside will be turned upside down." The young cultivator said in a flat tone, "It's just a branch altar. It's nothing even if it's destroyed." The old man was startled, and then said angrily, "Altar master, what are you saying?" He suppressed his anger. "Altar master, don't give up on yourself. As long as Altar master is willing to show up, the branch altar can still be defended." The young cultivator still looked as if it had nothing to do with him, and said, "So what if the branch altar is destroyed?" "Even if the Luo denomination is destroyed, what does it have to do with me?" That old man was stunned and said, "Altar master, what are you saying? Without the Luo denomination, where would there be a place for us to live?" The young cultivator turned to look at the old man, and said indifferently as if he was talking about something normal, "You're wrong. Without the Luo denomination, I can still cultivate in the Great Tao." The old man suddenly said angrily, "Nonsense. If it wasn't for the sect taking you in, how could you, Yao Kenbei, have the cultivation you have today?" Yao Kenbei shook his head and said, "If it wasn't for the Luo denomination, my cultivation would be even higher." The old man trembled all over. "Fine, if you don't want to, then it's up to you. I'll go and stop them." Yao Kanbei looked at his departing back with a pitiful gaze and said, "You ignorant people, you don't know the foundation, don't know the true path, how can you transcend?" As the mighty power of the spirits of creation was gradually drawn into the all-beings, some of the spirits of creation also gradually became active. A few of them suddenly understood their own foundation. It was the same for the spirits of creation that existed in the Luo sect, Xing sect, and Yen sect. However, most of them recognized their own sect and did not have the thought of abandoning it. There were also some who were simply subdued and did not dare to show such thoughts. However, there were also a few who thought that since they could see the great Tao, then why should they seek for the outside path? The sect that nurtured them was only using them. It was already good enough that they did not target them, so why would they serve them? And Yao Kanbei was one of them. He felt that he had already seen through everything, and that all living beings were just like ants. At most, they were just stepping stones, and were not worth his attention. At this moment, a loud sound came from outside, and it was the sound of the restriction outside being broken. He knew that he could not stay here for long. Even if he understood himself, his strength did not increase by much. If he continued to wait, he was afraid that he would be trapped here like these people from the Luo denomination. Therefore, he tiptoed and flew outside. Once he reached the sky, he looked up and saw countless rays of light crisscrossing above. There were constantly mana and supernatural powers colliding with each other, and there were still remnants of the restriction collapsing and disintegrating. He knew that the situation was hopeless, and even if he was willing to take action now, it was impossible to turn the tide. He immediately took out a treasure and flew away in a ray of light. Not far away, there were a few Yen denomination protectors standing on a flying ship. At this moment, they also realized that he had escaped, but after a discussion, they decided to let him go. After all, Yao Canbei's cultivation was not weak. If he wanted to escape, they might not be able to capture him even if they caught up to him. Compared to this matter, destroying this branch altar was obviously more important. After Yao Kanbei left the branch altar, he did not hesitate and flew in a direction that he had thought of before. A few days later, he arrived above a lake, and then he sank to the bottom of the lake. He casually set up a restriction before he sat down here, and with a single thought, he'd entered his heart dimension and started to seek the grand Tao from within it. However, not every spirit of creation could see his own realm of mind, and there were very few like him. In just a moment, he came out from inside, and his cultivation had greatly increased. The Tao of spirit of creation was also to excavate oneself. As long as he understood a part of the Tao, he would be able to improve his cultivation. Of course, he did not dare to continue this kind of improvement without limit, because if he completely followed the Tao in his heart, then he would be the external reflection of the Tao. Even if he could obtain the Tao, he would no longer be himself. When Zhang Quan first told Meng Hu not to rush to increase his realm, but to first stabilize himself, it was because of this reason. If Yao Kanbei wanted to obtain the Tao, but he did not want to lose himself, he could only stop when he felt that he was about to lose himself. He would only continue when he felt that his Tao heart could bear the Tao again. However, at this moment, he was thinking about what his next step should be. The branch altar that he was originally at was the biggest base of the Luo denomination in this world. Now that this place was breached, the fate of the remaining branches could be imagined. It would not take long for the Yen denomination to occupy the entire heaven world again. Next, they would definitely search everywhere for fish that escaped the net like him. However, what made him distressed was that when the Luo denomination sent him here, although they also borrowed the closed door of the two realms, they could only come and not leave. Therefore, he could not leave this heaven world by himself. Unless, he suddenly had a bold idea in his heart. After thinking about it repeatedly, he felt that it was still feasible. Therefore, after a few days, he came out of his hiding place and headed towards the branch altar of the Yen denomination. Before he reached the boundary, two patrolling deacons came up to question him and interrogate him about his origins. He did not hide anything and confessed his original identity. The two deacons were shocked and immediately reported it to the branch altar. When the branch altar master heard the report, he was also shocked. They had never encountered such a thing before and did not dare to handle it on their own. Therefore, they reported the matter to the headquarters. Not long after, a guardian elder came, but was ordered to bring him to the headquarters. Yao Kanbei seemed to be extremely obedient, and he allowed the person from teaching Yen to place restrictions on him. After that, he was escorted through the dimension gate by the protector elder. However, right at this instant, there seemed to be a mighty force that disturbed him. When this elder emerged from the other side of the dimension gate, he turned pale with fright because he noticed that Yao Kanbei had actually vanished without a trace. After Yao Kanbei was in a trance, he appeared above an unfamiliar boundary. There was no guardian elder by his side. He immediately knew that his plan had succeeded, but he did not know where he was. He discerned it and noticed that the spiritual energy here was boundless, and it was much more abundant than any place he'd seen in the past. After pondering for a moment, he thought of a possibility, and he couldn't help but reveal a pleasantly surprised expression. Could this be the Kuan beginning continent? Chapter 2232. The Kuan beginning continent was filled with boundless opportunities and endless opportunities. It was rumored in the myriad of worlds that it was the most superior place of cultivation. However, the Luo sect and the Xing sect were located in another land of creation. It was impossible to enter this place without passing through the realm gate of Yanjiao. This time, Yao Kanbei only wanted to use the sudden rise in the mighty power of the spirit of creation when he passed through the realm gate to send himself to a place far away from the Yanjiao. However, he did not expect that his luck would be so good that he actually arrived here. Although the spirit of creation Tao technique focused on digging oneself, it did not completely abandon spiritual opportunity like the Yanjiao realm Tao technique. With spiritual opportunity as an aid, it was undoubtedly faster to cultivate. Yao Kanbei thought that he was blessed by the Tao technique. However, he soon realized that this place was not as beautiful as he imagined. The boundless spiritual opportunity on the continent had nurtured countless demons and monsters. His cultivation was only at the level of Yuaning. It was almost impossible for him to move an inch here. Moreover, he was sent here because of the interference of the spirit of creation Weili. It was naturally impossible for him to land near the human Tao. There were no cultivation sects in the surroundings. Fortunately, his Tao technique was superior and could conceal his qi dynamic. However, if he wanted to survive here, he must raise his cultivation. However, the more he raised his cultivation, the more he would lose himself. However, he had no choice but to raise his cultivation. Otherwise, he would not be able to deal with such a dangerous situation. He also realized that this was his own choice. It was also the spirit of creation Weili's intention to push him to merge with the Tao technique as soon as possible. Very quickly, half a month passed. After another round of closed-door cultivation, his expression was incomparably gloomy. He could feel that if he were to enter the heart realm to seek Tao arts one more time, then he would no longer be himself. His original consciousness would be replaced by pure Tao arts. He remembered that there were sects in the Kunshe continent. If he could find traces of people, not only would he be able to find a place of shelter, he could also avoid being merged with the Tao technique. Therefore, he calculated for a while. However, he felt that the mysteries of heaven were unclear and there was no result. After thinking for a while, he decided on a direction. He didn't know why he wanted to go there, but he felt that this was the right direction. It was as if something was attracting him. A few days later, he suddenly felt a fluctuation of spiritual opportunity in front of him. He could tell that it was a manifestation of a magical Tao technique and not some kind of demon or monster. He leaped forward and saw a young cultivator standing on a small hill in the distance with a child standing next to him. In front of him was a ferocious monster that was 10,000 feet tall. However, it stumbled as it moved forward, and when it flapped its wings, it raised a curtain of dust that was as large as a mountain. It seemed to have been hit by some sort of trick. The child clapped his hands and said, "Fall, fall, fall." However, the monster seemed to be determined as well. It stubbornly held on and did not fall. In the end, even when its life force was exhausted, it was still standing on all fours and did not fall. The child snorted, his little face very dissatisfied. When Yao Kanbei saw this, he moved forward and called out from afar, "Fellow Taoists, I'm not a demon, please don't." Before he could finish speaking, his expression changed, and he leaped into the air, dodging a beam of light. Thankfully, after that attack, the other party didn't do anything else. However, he didn't dare to get any closer at the moment. The child waved his hand and retracted the spiritual light. He said to the young cultivator beside him, "Mister, that seems to be a person." The young cultivator exclaimed, "Fellow Taoist, you're really amazing to dare to come here alone." The moment Yao Kanbei heard this, he knew that it was just a misunderstanding just now. Thus, he carefully approached and cupped his hands in greeting from a distance. He gave a fake name and said, "Itinerant cultivator Yao Zhan greets the two fellow Taoists." The young cultivator returned the greeting and said, "My name is Meng Hu, a teaching Yen cultivator. This is my disciple, Vu." The child returned the greeting reluctantly. When Yao Kanbei heard this, he was shocked. Why was there a teaching Yen follower here? And why was he so unlucky to run into one? He couldn't help but raise his guard. However, when he thought about it again, it was impossible for the other party to recognize his true identity, so he didn't need to be too nervous. He said, "I'm skilled in the art of hiding, which is why I dared to travel here alone. I've made a fool of myself." The two of them chatted for a while. Because they were both human cultivators and there were great demons and ferocious beasts everywhere in the wasteland, they naturally agreed to travel together. Yao Kanbei originally thought that he would be able to get out of this place by following the two. However, after walking for more than 10 days, he felt that the further he went, the more powerful the great demons he encountered became. He couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Taoist, where are we going?" Meng Hu stopped and said in surprise, "Fellow Taoist doesn't know." Yao Kanbei's heart tightened. Could it be that there was something he should know? He composed himself and raised his hand in greeting, saying, "I'm ashamed. I'm just a lone cultivator. This time, I came out to search for a fortuitous encounter. There are many things I don't know, but I'd like to ask fellow Taoist. Of course, if it's inconvenient for fellow Taoist to tell me, then just pretend that I never asked." Meng Hu grunted and said, "There's nothing I can't say. We encountered great demons along the way and fought them all the way. When we were about to return, we discovered that the returning tablet's aura was scattered and we couldn't find the way back." Yao Kanbei was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "Fellow Taoist, you're saying that you've long lost your Tao path." Then before, Meng Hu said matter-of-factly, "We thought fellow Taoist knew the way, so we followed fellow Taoist." Zhuo Yu said with dissatisfaction, "If you didn't know the way, then say so earlier. You caused us to go the wrong way." Yao Kanbei felt a tightness in his chest. He took a breath, thinking that things weren't actually that bad and that there was still room for improvement. The three of them walked together. The demons here could be dealt with. Since they knew where the problem was, then they just had to find the way back. He said, "Fellow Taoist, don't be anxious. We'll definitely find a way. We can observe the stars in the sky, investigate the flow of the qi of the earth, or sense the changes in the aura of the past. It shouldn't be difficult to find the way back, right?" Zhuo Yu said with a look of disdain, "This is the depths of the Kuan-Shi continent. The demonic aura shrouds the top, making it impossible to fly high and far. There are also countless illusions, so what we see and feel might not be real. If those ordinary methods that you mentioned could be used, would I still need you to say it?" Yao Kanbei thought that he was a creation spirit that had entered the mortal realm and was once an altar master of the Luo order. His identity was extraordinary, yet he was taught a lesson by a child. Instantly, he felt a little angry and murderous intent rose in his heart. However, this wasn't the time to be angry, so he maintained his usual expression and said, "I see. Forgive me for not knowing about this, but I'd like to ask before I arrive, fellow Taoist, are you preparing to return?" Zhuo Yu said angrily, "We don't know each other, but the demons and monsters here definitely know each other, so we're preparing to catch one. However, the different species here are very stubborn. They would rather kill themselves than be caught alive by us." Yao Kanbei thought for a while and said, "Pardon me for asking, fellow Taoist, you've been out for so long, could it be that no one in the cult noticed you? Would there be people coming out to look for you?" Meng Hu said with a solemn face, "To be honest, my cultivation progress is too fast, and I'm a reasonable cultivator who respects my teachers. That's why I'm often envied by others." Zhuo Yu also nodded and agreed, "Those in the branch altars aren't good people." Meng Hu sighed and said, "I wish to be with the light, but I'm too handsome. If there's a next life, I wish to be a mediocre person, not like what I'm seeing right now, like reaching the peak, lonely at the top." Yao Kanbei was expressionless. Meng Hu shook his head and said, "Let's go, let's not talk about this anymore. The road ahead is dangerous. We can only rely on ourselves." Yao Kanbei glanced at the back of the two people, his heart moved, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. He suddenly realized that this was an opportunity. He could tell that these two people weren't valued by the sect at all, so no one cared about them when they were lost outside. Then, if he could summon these two people into his heart realm and use the Tao of creation to reform them, even if he couldn't make them listen to his orders, it would still be convenient for him to do things in the future. Although he couldn't see through the specific cultivation of this Yanjiao cultivator called Meng Hu, as long as he entered his heart realm, it wouldn't be an obstacle. However, he wouldn't immediately believe someone's words. This might also be the other party's test for him, so he didn't act immediately, but prepared to wait for a few more days to confirm that no one would come to rescue him. Another half a month passed, and the three people were still wandering in the wasteland. Yao Kanbei hesitated at this moment. Even though he didn't see anyone from the branch coming to rescue them, which could be considered as confirming the two people's words, the master and disciple duo didn't seem to be anxious or uneasy at all. Instead, it was as if they were on an outing, and every time they encountered a great demon or ferocious beast, they would happily slaughter it. What danger ahead? Where was the danger? He didn't see it at all. However, He could feel that the cultivation of the surrounding demons was getting higher and higher, and their journey also gradually slowed down. Another few days passed, and the three of them discovered that the surroundings were filled with the aura of great demons. No matter which direction they went, there was no way out, so they could only stop and discuss countermeasures. Meng Hu said with a solemn expression, "We've entered the depths of the wasteland that no one has ever been to before. If we continue to move, I'm afraid we'll encounter demons and ferocious beasts that are difficult to resist." Yao Canbei's heart was also heavy. He completely didn't expect that he would actually fall into such a desperate situation. If he was not careful, he might fall into eternal damnation. He said, "What do you plan to do, fellow Taoist?" Meng Hu sighed, "Since we can't find a way out, we can only leave this place." Yao Canbei didn't understand what this meant, so he tried to ask, "What do you mean, fellow Taoist? Since there's no way out, how do we leave this place?" Meng Hu looked at him strangely and said, "Of course we'll break through the void and leave this Kunsher continent, then find a way to return." He was currently in the Grotto Heaven realm, so he could naturally break through this world and go somewhere else. At most, it would take a few days before he could return to the branch altar. Yao Canbei's expression stiffened, then he suddenly thought of something bad, and hurriedly said, "But fellow Taoist, you can leave, but how can your disciple leave? You have to think for your disciple." Before he finished speaking, Zhuyu had already turned into a rainbow light, flying into a jade stone hanging on Meng Hu's waist. Meng Hu cupped his hands at him and solemnly said, "Fellow Taoist, we'll part here." Yao Canbei said, "Eh." Meng Hu tapped his foot and instantly rushed into the sky. Then, with a rumble, he broke through the heaven and earth and went beyond the sky. Yao Canbei stood on the spot, staring blankly at the crack in the sky above him, and his expression became extremely unsightly. He secretly regretted that he didn't make a move earlier. However, Zhuyu had reminded him that so long as he was able to cultivate to the Grotto Heaven realm, and at the same time, he tried his best not to be assimilated by that Tao art, he would still be able to leave this place. However, just as he was thinking like this, he heard the aura that covered the heavens and the earth surge over violently from outside, and his face couldn't help but turn pale. Due to the commotion caused by Meng Hu's breaking through the void just now, it had instantly drawn the attention of the demons in the surroundings, and at this moment, they were actually all rushing towards him. Chapter 2233. Although the Lu Yen branch altar in Kunsher continent was only a branch altar in name, due to Gao Qingtu's support, not only were there elite disciples transferred from various altars, but its scale was also unprecedentedly large. There were more than 100 altars under its jurisdiction and millions of followers. In order to properly control this branch altar, the position of altar master was directly assumed by an elder sent by the main altar, and the chief protector was chosen from the protectors who had made great contributions in the branch altar. In order to prevent someone from holding this position for a long time, an altar master had to be changed every 100 years. During these 100 years, an elder called Yuan Qifeng had presided over this place. Although he wasn't Gao Qingtu's disciple, his talent was extremely high, and he was one of the few cultivators in the sect who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Tang Yu. However, seeing that he was about to leave this place in a few years, he had a headache because of a matter. According to the sect's rules, the next chief protector must be recommended by him. This was originally a good thing, but he had been unable to decide which protector under his jurisdiction to recommend. This was because if the person who was recommended achieved great merits in the future, then needless to say, he naturally had a good eye for talent. But if this person made a mistake, then he himself would also be implicated, so he had no choice but to be cautious. There were many protectors in the branch altar, but the chief protector must be selected from the few people with the highest cultivation. In this way, the scope was greatly reduced. Hifeng Chan Shan, Yang Ying, Oing. Elder Yuan's eyes drifted as if he had thought of something unpleasant. He automatically skipped this name in his mind and directly thought of the next person. Just as he was thinking, the administrator outside the door said, "Elder, there are memorials sent by the administrators of the various altars." Elder Yuan said in a deep voice, "Bring them in." The administrator walked in, placed dozens of memorials on the table, bowed, and retreated. Elder Yuan picked up the memorials and looked through them one by one. He couldn't help but frown. Although these memorials were worded differently, they were undoubtedly talking about the same thing. The Yen sect's followers were in constant conflict with many surrounding sects, causing many disciples of both sides to be injured. In fact, the conflict between the Yen sect and the various sects had a long history. The Tao of the Yen sect didn't need external objects, and they didn't care about one's identity when accepting a disciple. As long as one was fated, one could enter the Tao. In addition, the existence of the realm gate made the large sects less and less restrained. Although the large sects wouldn't care about this, the Yen sect's influence was spread throughout the heavens. It was inevitable that some sects wouldn't give any face, and this was especially common in the Kunshe continent. On the surface, this continent seemed to be filled with boundless spiritual opportunity and countless treasures. It seemed that there was no need to worry about this. However, in reality, most of the territories that the various sects could roam were opened up by the seniors. Moreover, once there was no one stationed there, it would not be long before it would be occupied by demons and ferocious beasts again. It was already very difficult to maintain it now. However, the involvement of the Yen sect could be said to have thinned out the harvest that originally belonged to the various sections. The only thing he could do to solve this matter was to find a way to dispatch people to eliminate the great demons and monsters, and open up their own harvesting land for the Yen sect. At least he wouldn't need to fight with the various sects now. He pondered for a while. Now that he was in a dilemma about the candidate for the Great Guardian, it would be better to leave this matter to these few people. He would recommend whoever made the greatest contribution, and then he wouldn't need to worry about it anymore. At this moment, the disciple in charge said from outside, "Elder, just now, there's an order from the headquarters on the altar." Elder Yuan's expression froze, and he sat up straight. After muttering a few words, a talisman flew in and floated motionlessly in front of him. He took it and opened it. It said that after the sect destroyed a Luo sect branch altar, they escorted the altar master to the headquarters. However, he accidentally escaped from the realm gate. After strict investigation, it was found that this person's identity wasn't simple. It was very likely that he was the reincarnation of the spirit of creation, and it was very likely that he had come to the Kunshe continent. They wanted him to find a way to capture him and prevent him from entering the world to cause trouble. Seeing that this matter involved the spirit of creation, his eyelids couldn't help but twitch. He felt a little uncomfortable for no reason. After a while, he said, "Come in." The disciple in charge walked in and said, "Elder, what orders do you have?" "Daoren Yuan, where's Guardian Meng? Go and summon him to see me." The disciple in charge said, "Elder, Guardian Meng isn't in the altar." Elder Yuan frowned and asked, "Where did he go?" The disciple in charge said, "Someone saw the great guardian flying to the depths of the wasteland with Guardian Meng a few days ago. I think they're going to search for the treasures that the headquarters needs, but they haven't returned yet. Daoren Yuan, send a message to them, tell them to come back as soon as possible." The disciple in charge said awkwardly, "Elder, the great guardian and the others seem to have gone to the depths of the wasteland. We've already sent a few letters asking about them, but we haven't received any reply yet." Elder Yuan was displeased. "Why didn't you report this to me earlier?" The disciple in charge knelt down and said, "I'm sorry. Elder went to the headquarters a few days ago, and as soon as you came back, you've been busy with mundane affairs. I didn't dare to disturb you with such a small matter." Elder Yuan glanced at him and said, "Don't do this next time." The great guardian Duan Qing had never been on good terms with him. It was obvious that the disciple in charge could tell that the great guardian Duan Qing might be in trouble, so he intentionally delayed the news, which indirectly caused the great guardian Duan Qing to suffer more. Elder Yuan actually didn't like this kind of behavior, but since he had already done it, he wouldn't be too harsh on his disciple. He pondered for a while and said, "Go and invite Guardian He here." The disciple in charge obeyed and left. Not long after, a cultivator in his 30s, wearing an elegant hat and a wide belt, came into the hall and bowed respectfully, saying, "Greetings, Elder Yuan." Elder Yuan nodded and called him to sit down, then said, "Just now, the headquarters sent down an edict saying that a spirit from beyond the heavens has entered our world. Our Yen sect has always guarded this generation strictly, so I need to find it as soon as possible so that I can give an explanation to the headquarters. You've always been thorough in your work, and you're also reliable and capable. This time, I'll leave it to you." Yifang's spirit was roused. He also knew that Elder Yuan and Duan Qing were about to return to the headquarters. At that time, the vacant position of the Great Guardian would definitely be chosen from among the guardians in the headquarters, and if he could complete the edict issued by the headquarters, then even if he didn't have to say that this position would definitely belong to him, he would definitely become a strong candidate that Elder Yuan would prioritize. However, he didn't agree rashly and asked, "Elder, may I know the origin of this spirit from beyond the heavens, and what abilities does it have?" Elder Yuan was very satisfied with his attitude, but the matter of the spirit of creation was a secret of the sect, so he couldn't say it out loud, so he said, "The edict didn't say it in detail, only that there's an almighty being behind this spirit's back. If it's someone with a weak will, it's extremely likely that they'll be bewitched by its Tao, and it's even more impossible for low-level cultivators and mortals to resist." Yifang's expression immediately became a bit more serious. As expected, this matter wasn't that simple, and it might be even more troublesome than he had imagined. He pondered for a while, then said, "Although the Kunshi continent is vast, there are gods paying attention to all the countries of the human path. If they're the slightest bit careless, they'll expose their tracks. Although this fellow can bewitch people's hearts, it's most likely that he wouldn't dare to do so. It's more likely that he's looking for the encampment of some small sect and turning them into his own followers of Tao. In this way, he can conceal himself and also find a place to settle down." Elder Yuan saw that he was full of confidence, but he frowned imperceptibly. Compared to others, Yifang's work was the most reassuring, but he was also very conceited. Even though he appeared to be very kind to those of the same path on the surface, he looked down on many people in his heart. In the past, he could tolerate these small flaws, but if he really reached the position of the chief protector, this could become a fatal flaw. His thoughts turned, and he decided to give him a pointer, so he said, "The cultivation of my Yanjiao doesn't require spiritual opportunity, and I don't seek external things, but on the path, I need the support and assistance of those of the same path. Only then will I be successful in every endeavor. You must remember this." Yifang said respectfully, "I'll remember Elder's teachings." With one look, Elder Yuan knew that he didn't really listen to him, but he was still a talent that could be nurtured, and he never made any mistakes in his work. It all depended on how the matter he was instructed to do this time. If it didn't work, it wouldn't be too late to replace him. At this moment, he heard a commotion outside, and he said unhappily, "What happened outside?" The managing disciple came in to report, "It's Protector Meng who returned, and he even brought back a lot of demon corpses." Elder Yuan Daoren asked, "Is the chief protector also back?" The managing disciple lowered his head and said, "I haven't seen the chief protector." Elder Yuan felt that something was wrong and said, "Call Protector Meng over immediately, I have something to ask him." After the managing disciple left, he gave a few more instructions to Yifang, telling him to resolve this matter as soon as possible, and that the people in the altar could cooperate with him. After Yifang agreed, he walked out of the mansion. He had only taken a few steps when he saw Meng Hu walking towards him. He felt contempt in his heart, but on the surface, he was polite and considerate. He bowed with a smile and said, "So it's Protector Meng, you've returned. Greetings." Meng Hu walked like the wind, and he bowed to him and said in a clear voice, "Protector Yang, greetings." Yifang's smile stiffened and he said, "Protector Meng, I'm he." But before he could finish, Meng Hu had already walked into the mansion. He put away his smile, snorted, and left in a huff. After Meng Hu entered the mansion, he was brought to the inner hall by the managing disciple. When he saw Elder Yuan, he bowed and said, "Elder Yuan, greetings." Elder Yuan was reading the report, and he responded, "Since you're here, take a seat." He looked up and saw that Meng Hu was already sitting on the seat below him, and he could not help but choke. He coughed, put down the report, and said with a pleasant expression, "Not long ago, I went to the altar to visit the chief, and on the way, I met High Official Zhang. This is the talisman letter that he asked me to pass to you. As he spoke, he took out a talisman letter from his sleeve and placed it on the table. In fact, he understood that it was not difficult for Zhang Quan to personally pass this letter to Meng Hu, but asking him to pass it to him was clearly telling him that Meng Hu was his disciple and he wanted him to take care of him. He felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, but it was not that he did not want to give face to Zhang Quan, but he thought, don't you know the number of High Official Zhang's disciple? You still want me to take care of him? Meng Hu summoned the letter, read it once, and put it into his sleeve. Seeing that he was sitting there calmly and did not say anything, Elder Yuan guessed that there was nothing serious involved, so he said, I heard that you and Great Protector Duan went to the depths of the wasteland to search for treasures and materials. Since you've returned, where is Great Protector Duan? Chapter 2234. Great Guardian? Meng Hu fell into deep thought. Elder Yuan's expression froze as he stared at him. After a while, Meng Hu sighed. That was in the autumn of the year before last. Great Guardian, Elder Yuan decisively cut him off. I don't want to hear about that. Seeing that Meng Hu was about to speak again, he immediately cut him off. Don't tell me about last year either. He paused for a while before continuing. You can settle your dispute with Great Guardian yourself. What I'm asking you is, after you and Great Guardian left the division together, where did he go? Meng Hu made an "oh" sound and said, even though I had planned to follow the head guardian, the journey did not last long. The head guardian advised me that it would be better for us to act separately. Otherwise, if we were to kill the demons, who would be credited to? I thought about it and felt that it made sense, so I parted ways with the Great Protector. Elder Yuan glanced at him. It was obvious that Great Guardian did not want to travel with him, so he used such a roundabout way. He said, so, you never saw Great Guardian after that? Meng Hu pondered for a while. When he was about to say something, Elder Yuan stretched out his hand to stop him. That's enough. You don't have to say anything. I know. Just as he was about to send Meng Hu away, he suddenly thought of something inappropriate. Just now, although the matter of dealing with the creation spirit was handed over to He Feng, Meng Hu had been the one to deal with such matters previously. In fact, Elder Yuan had wanted to do so at first, but since he had already given the order, he could not take it back. He was afraid that Meng Hu would cause trouble if he found out about this. Elder Yuan's mind turned. He could only think of a way to send Meng Hu away. This way, they could avoid contact between the two sides, and also give Meng Hu some peace. After making up his mind, he said, Protector Meng, in a few years, Great Protector Duan and I will step down from our positions and return to the headquarters. However, the position of Great Protector will have to be chosen from your generation. Among all the protectors, you have the highest cultivation. I also have my eyes on you. If you make a great contribution, I can recommend you to the position. Meng Hu gladly nodded and said, Then I'll have to trouble you, Elder. Elder Yuan's breath slightly stagnated, but he suppressed it in the blink of an eye. He did his best to slow down his tone as he said, Protector Meng, you need to understand that this matter has yet to be decided. Our Yen teaching has always been based on merit. I have a task here that I need to entrust to you. If you succeed, then the position of Great Protector will belong to you. Without waiting for Meng Hu to reply, he swiftly took out a talisman from his sleeve. Presently, the various sects and my Yen sect are rather at odds with each other. During these past few decades, I've had many conflicts with this generation, and there've even been quite a few disciples that have suffered injuries. I need you to find a way to mediate this matter. If you're able to successfully resolve this matter, then I'll fulfill my promise from before. There's no time to lose, so you can set out right now. I'll take care of the various Dharma altars and do my best to give you convenience. After sending Meng Hu away, he didn't know why, but his entire body felt relaxed, and a trace of a smile appeared on his face. He knew very well that the conflict between the Yen teaching and the outer sects wasn't accumulated in a day or two. This kind of matter was a fundamental conflict of interest, and in fact, it couldn't be resolved. However, he didn't expect Meng Hu to be able to accomplish it, and only needed to send him away for the time being. In this way, the position of Great Protector couldn't possibly fall onto Meng Hu. Otherwise, even if he returned to the headquarters, he would probably be trembling with fear every day, afraid that he would be implicated. After Feng left the mansion hall, he came to the side hall of the subaltar with a sullen face. He handed over a talisman and said to the guard, "I'm acting under the orders of Elder Yuan. Now I need to borrow the Celestial Observatory. I hope you can make an exception." There were only 2 Celestial Observatory in the Yen teaching. One was in the headquarters and the other was placed here. It could be used to observe the changes in the spiritual vigor of a world. However, because there were some flaws left during the sacrificial refining back then, this object would consume a lot of precious materials every time it was activated. Therefore, if there was no order, it usually couldn't be used. Even though he came with an order this time, the guard still didn't have a good expression and said coldly, "You're only allowed to use it for an hour." Usually, Feng wouldn't care about the looks of others because to him, other than himself, everyone else was mediocre. However, for some reason, when he heard this, his heart was burning with anger. He secretly thought that when he took the position of Great Protector, the first thing he would do was to remove a group of people decisively so that the order could be passed smoothly. Otherwise, it would be like now, the entire subaltar looked huge, but in reality, each deacon had their own people that they were loyal to, so they couldn't use their power in one place. When the guard opened the hall door, he walked inside and saw that the Celestial Observatory was inverted on a square wooden plate like a hemisphere, which was a metaphor for the round sky and square earth. He walked closer and waved his sleeves. In a split second, countless pictures of mountains and rivers appeared in front of him. The chi dynamic inside was also revealed in front of him like the waves of water. Because he didn't have enough magic power, he didn't have the power to look at the entire Kunshe continent. However, if the otherworldly spirit landed in an extremely distant place after entering the world, then it might not be able to smoothly reach the territory occupied by the human Tao. Therefore, he only had to look at it up close. His gaze stared at it, gradually moving from the inside to the outside, gradually moving into the distance. After a long time, he suddenly exclaimed in surprise. There seemed to be a violent movement in a certain place. There were clearly traces left behind by a cultivator passing through the world sky, but he couldn't make out the specifics. He thought to himself, this might be the territory that the otherworldly spirit passed through. Although it's a distance away from the human Tao territory, it's not far. I should go and take a look. Although that place was remote and there were many evil and ferocious monsters, he had the protection talisman that Elder Yuan gave him, so he wasn't afraid of encountering any danger. Therefore, he took out the talisman and called for a large spirit boat, leaving the subaltar and heading in that direction. At the same time, on the other side, the corpses of several great demons were lying on the ground, without any signs of life. Great Protector Duan Cheng of the subaltar of Yen Yen stood in mid-air and looked at the cultivator he saved with his sleeves behind his back, saying, "Which sect are you from? Why are you here?" Yao Kanbei was still in a state of shock. Several great demons attacked him, and he thought that he would definitely die here. Fortunately, these great demons saw each other as a threat and threw him to the side. They first started fighting each other, and only then did he have a chance to breathe. However, when the outcome of the battle was decided, he wouldn't be able to escape either. Fortunately, his fate hadn't run out yet. Duan Cheng was originally killing demons nearby, but when he sensed the abnormal changes in the chi activity here, he rushed over and either killed or drove away these ferocious monsters, saving his life. Yao Kanbei composed himself and bowed, saying, "Wandering cultivator Yao Zhan, in search of a strange fruit, I accidentally entered the depths of the wasteland. Thank you for your help, senior." Duan Cheng glanced at him and saw that he only had a Yuanian cultivation base, so he didn't bother to waste his transcendence energy to watch him pass by. He asked directly, "Although you have the ability to conceal your chi activity, you couldn't have reached this place by yourself. Someone should have traveled with you. Where is this person now?" Yao Kanbei sighed. "Senior's eyes are like torches. I originally met a fellow Taoist traveling with me, But when he saw that he was deep in the wasteland and couldn't deal with the surrounding demons, he broke through the sky and went somewhere else. Duan Cheng said, "I see, but he really shouldn't have left you here alone." Yao Kanbei pretended to be hesitant, saying, "This is in the past, let's not mention his name. We might meet again in the future." Duan Qing glanced at him and said, "It's up to you. Since we ran into each other on the way, then follow me. Once we leave this region, you can go wherever you want." Yao Kanbei hurriedly thanked him. Duan Qing released a spirit boat and used his transcendence energy to pull him up. Then he turned around and left. However, after a day, the two of them reached the border of the wasteland. He said, "Go east along this path, there shouldn't be any demons blocking your way." Yao Kanbei bowed and said, "May I know where Senior is cultivating?" Duan Qing waved his hand and said, "I don't need you to repay me. Let's go our separate ways from now on." After putting Yao Kanbei down, he kept the spirit boat and left. At this moment, Yao Kanbei let out a long sigh of relief. Just now, the reason why he didn't say Meng Hu's name was not because he was pretending to be benevolent, but because he could sense that Duan Qing was a member of the Yen sect. He didn't know what relationship Meng Hu had with Meng Hu, but the two of them were from the same sect after all. If he said the truth and Meng Hu became suspicious of his identity, then he would be asking for trouble. Fortunately, now that he was out of the wasteland, he could find a random small sect and send these people into their sect's Tao technique. Then, he would find a place to cultivate diligently. When he obtained a shocking divine ability, he would naturally be able to do whatever he wanted in the world and not be afraid of anyone. At this moment, he thought about how he was almost killed by Meng Hu in the wasteland. He laughed coldly, thinking that when he achieved great success in his cultivation, he would definitely take revenge. With a tap of his foot, he soared into the sky and began to search for a suitable target. Half a month later, he set his eyes on a sect with about 100 people and entered the sect under the name of Visiting the Tao. During the banquet, he easily drew the sect leader's mind into his heart realm. In just an instant, the sect leader was subdued by his Tao technique. A few days later, under the arrangement of the sect master, he also reformed a few elders here. However, at this moment, he discovered something. The more cultivators that submitted to his Tao technique, the faster his cultivation improved. Moreover, he wasn't affected by the Tao technique like before. This discovery caused him to be overjoyed. If he was able to reform even more people, then it wouldn't be long before his cultivation would be able to rise another level. Thus, he set his sights on those disciples. Because the upper echelons of the sect had already fallen, it was naturally extremely easy for him to accomplish this. After he finished, he was obviously able to sense his cultivation slowly rising, and he was extremely satisfied with it. Moreover, he started to think about how to reform even more people. However, he didn't notice that every time he reformed a person, strands of black qi would appear out of thin air and seep into his body. At this moment, his body was already covered in a thin layer of black mist, and it was ceaselessly being pulled into the Wei spirit of creation. Actually, it wasn't just him. All the spirits of creation within the wasteland that had comprehended their own Tao technique were the same. Only those like Meng Hu who had avoided this Tao a long time ago, and just now, such an unusual situation hadn't occurred. Chapter 2235. In Qinghuan Palace, Zhang Yan sat cross-legged. He was observing the changes in Fengdu's and the others' qi activity through the layers of Weili. On the surface, it seemed that Fengdu's recruitment of the Weili was going smoothly. Although there were small changes every time, they were all dealt with smoothly. But just when he thought that this situation would continue, a strange feeling suddenly appeared in his mind. His eyes flashed slightly, and he knew that something must have gone wrong. He looked up at the changes in the mighty power of the spirit of creation and calculated in his heart for a moment. However, he found that according to his original deduction, the incarnation of the mighty power should arrive in 50 years. However, the situation had changed at this moment. At most, it would only take a few years for the incarnation of the mighty power to land among all beings. However, In such a short period of time, the accumulation of the mighty power that descended was very weak. Even if the incarnation appeared, it was impossible for it to be a match for Fengdu and the others. It would only be killed in vain, so there must be a backup plan. Almost at the same time, Hongdu also noticed that something was wrong. He took a few steps forward and stared at the changes in the Weili. After a moment, he also saw the problem. His goal was to attract enough mighty power from the spirit of creation and then kill them in batches. Therefore, he had to attract enough mighty power each time. If there was only a small amount, it would not be able to weaken the spirit of creation at all. Moreover, he had to drag it out. The more time passed, the higher the possibility of the spirit of creation returning. He suspected that the Weili incarnations of the creation spirit had sensed their actions and responded spontaneously after feeling threatened. Xiangju and the others were a step late, but they also noticed the situation. Xiangju thought for a moment and suggested, "Fellow Taoist, should we increase the power of our recruitment?" Hongdu did not dwell on this at all. He waved his hand and said, "This time, the outcome has been decided. There's no need to fix it. Victory or defeat is not decided in this round. After this, we'll try again. Next time, he won't be able to escape." He could see very clearly that after the spirit of creation Weili made a counterattack, it would not be easy to reverse it. Since he might not be able to block the loophole, he might as well ignore it. There was still a chance on his side. He glanced at the disappearing spirit light and waved his sleeve to disperse it. He said, "This thing is useless now." Although he had missed this opportunity and failed to achieve his goal, he did not feel the slightest bit upset. Instead, he was excited, as if he had found a good enough opponent. Since they were going to fight, they might as well have a good fight. Several years passed in the blink of an eye. Under the watchful eyes of the great virtues, a Weili broke through the tribulation power and fell into the all things. Everyone observed silently. As expected, due to the lack of accumulation, the Weili did not cause any big waves. It did not even move the all things. In terms of level, it might be a level lower than the ordinary spirit refinement cultivators. It would be easy to kill it. The Weili quickly condensed into a Taoist figure. However, the Taoist just now condensed, but the moment it appeared, it collapsed on the spot. The Weili immediately fell into the all things and quickly weakened from everyone's perception. Zhang Yan saw this and confirmed his previous judgment. If the scattered Weili drifted into the all things, it would be easy to deal with them. All they needed to do now was to kill the great virtues as well as the Weili. The current situation was undoubtedly due to the numerous shattered spirits of creation within the all that are. Although some of these broken spirits of creation had already entered the world, most of them were still hidden in the undiscovered places of creation. Unless the great virtues could find these places, it would be impossible to find these scattered Weili. From the looks of it, this time the spirits of creation's Weili were not so much attracted by the crowd, it was more like they were sent out on their own initiative. He thought about it and wondered if he should intervene. After some consideration, he felt that Fengdu and the others had enough ability to deal with this matter. If he intervened at this time, it might cause unnecessary conflict with Fengdu. Fengdu and the other four were also discussing this matter at this moment. Wei Ming said calmly, "It's impossible for the original body of the spirit of creation to know what we're doing in the all things, and the setup in front of us just happened to avoid us. It must be a thought transmitted when the incarnation of the mighty force was suppressed. However, if we don't make him collapse, then it's impossible for such a situation to happen again." Hong Do glanced at the purple-clothed Taoist and sneered. This fellow's Taoist technique had been suppressed, so it was impossible for him to repeat the previous change. Xiangju laughed and said, "There are indeed not many places of creation that have been revealed today. It seems that we can't grasp the spirits of creation within them, but we don't have to keep an eye on them. Those spirits of creation that have already reincarnated into the world can actually be used." He paused for a moment and waited for everyone to look over before he said, "I've been deducing recently, and I've noticed that there's an extremely rare opportunity right now. Perhaps we can push one of the spirits of creation to surmount that originally insurmountable barrier and make it be of use to us." Ji Zhuang said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist, are you talking about pushing that person into the spirit refinement realm? Xiangju nodded and said, that's right. Once the incarnation of the spirits of creation achieves the spirit refinement realm, it is equivalent to washing away the original traces, and it will no longer be easily seized by the original. Wei Ming continued, in this way, in order to protect itself, it may even lean towards me. It can be considered as an enemy against an enemy. Xiangju smiled and said, exactly. Hongdu, however, showed a look of disdain and said, this kind of petty trick is just a small fight. How can it affect the overall situation? Later on, all you need to do is to continue to attract the Weili. There is no need to complicate matters. Seeing this, Xiangju did not say anything on the surface, but he secretly used his spirit to communicate to the other three, saying, fellow Taoist Fengdu disdains this method, I can do it myself. Hengwu said, since fellow Taoist Fengdu does not allow it, aren't you afraid that he will blame you for doing it privately? Xiangju said, I am not doing this out of selfishness, but to increase the chances of success. As long as fellow Taoists are willing to work with me, even if fellow Taoist Fengdu blames me, I am willing to bear this matter alone. Everyone knew in their hearts that even if this matter did not succeed, it would not be a big deal, because even if the spirits of creation entered the spirit refinement realm, they would not be able to achieve the position of Vedanta. If it really went against their wishes, then it would be better to be directly thrown into eternal silence. This way, the original body of the spirits of creation would instead forever lose a part of their power. Wei Ming said, which spirit of creation are you going to use, fellow Taoist? Xiangju looked at Ji Zhuang and said, fellow Taoist, under your Tao teachings, it seems like a spirit of creation has escaped and entered the world? Ji Zhuang said, that's right, this person was captured by the Yanjiao sect, and was later interfered with by the spirit of creation Weili who descended into all things and was sent to Bushutian. Xiangju said, then this person can be used. Wei Ming said, however, Bushutian is the territory of Taoist Xianyuan, we cannot interfere with it. If he finds out that something is wrong and kills him first, then wouldn't this plan be for naught? Xiangju said, that's why I need everyone's help. As long as you all work with me to conceal the heavenly secrets, I don't hope to completely deceive Taoist Xianyuan, I just hope to delay this matter for a while. Wei Ming said, I think we can give it a try. Ji Zhuang did not say anything to object, which was a tacit agreement. Hengwu said, I hope everything goes as you say, otherwise we will not only displease Hongdu, but also offend Taoist Xianyuan. Xiangju smiled and said, fellow Taoist, you worry too much. I just now said that I have no selfish motives in this. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm afraid that Taoist Xianyuan will deliberately obstruct me, why not make this matter clear? On the land of Kunshe continent, He Feng came to the west on a flying boat. Soon, he found the traces of Yao Kanbei breaking into the boundary that day. He captured a wisp of qi activity and searched along it. However, he found the traces left behind by Meng Hu. It seemed that this person had traveled with Meng Hu. This discovery made him feel refreshed, because this way, even if the clues were lost, he could still go back and ask Meng Hu about this person's identity. In fact, if the two of them had a good relationship, then he could immediately ask about the situation, and it could also save a lot of unnecessary trouble. But first, he did not like Meng Hu, and second, as a strong competitor for the position of the chief protector, he did not want Meng Hu to get involved in this matter, so that he would not get a share of the credit. However, it wasn't long before he actually noticed Chief Protector Duan Cheng's aura, and he deduced the process from the traces he left behind. Duan Cheng ought to have been trapped in a dangerous situation and almost died here, but he was saved by Duan Cheng by chance. This discovery made him speechless. Originally, they did not need to do anything at all, a great enemy from beyond the heavens would have died here, but instead he was saved by the cultivators of the human Tao. But then he thought that this was also good, because if not, how could he have the chance to make a contribution? And if this matter was handled properly, maybe he could even make Duan Cheng owe him a favor. He turned the flying boat, and followed the qi left behind. Not long after, he confirmed that the person had gone to a sect called Daxing sect. In fact, Yao Kanbei had been very careful to hide his qi, but when he entered the realm, he was only at the Yuanying level, so there was naturally nowhere for him to hide in front of Yifeng. Yifeng looked down. It was just a small sect, and the person with the highest level of cultivation was only at the Yuanying level. Even if that deviant spirit was added, it was still not a match for him, so this time it should be a piece of cake. But he was a cautious person, and he calculated in his heart that the deviant spirit had escaped certain death a few times, so no matter how he looked at it, it seemed that he was full of luck. After thinking about it, he still felt that it was necessary to be safe, so he stopped the flying boat in the distance, created a magical power incarnation, and headed to where the sect was. Then he sat cross-legged, closed his eyes, and waited. However, it wasn't long before he felt his mind go into a trance, and then he noticed that he'd appeared in a strange place. His reaction was swift, and he immediately deduced that this ought to be some sort of illusory realm. He immediately concentrated his mind and wanted to leave. However, at this moment, he heard a boundless and sonorous voice that seemed to contain boundless truths. As soon as he heard it, his mind was involuntarily drawn in, and then he sank deeper and deeper. It seemed that after a long time, he slowly opened his eyes, and a strange smile appeared on his face. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.